Well, hello and welcome to the 2021 Employment and Skills Convention. My name's Stephen Evans and I'm the Chief Executive of the Learning and Work Institute. This, I think, must be about something like the 20th year we've been running these conventions, and the second year we've done it online. I think when we did this online for the first time last year, I didn't think we'd be here a year later, several lockdowns on. And still doing these things by Zoom and still leaving ourselves on mute at various points. But I think we've had a really profound shock on the labour market over the last year through the effects of the pandemic. And now restrictions are being eased. You've got vacancies back up, economy's reopening, but we've still got higher unemployment and particularly growth in long-term unemployment as well. So we're here on this first day when furlough is starting to be phased out, or employers being asked to contribute a little bit more. We're a couple of weeks away from the timetabled ending of restrictions in England. So it's a really good time, I think, to be holding the convention. We've got a really packed agenda. So I'm not going to say too much by way of introduction. You'll all be immensely relieved. But we've got a lot to discuss about how we recover from the pandemic, but also how we, the sort of labour market, the sort of economy, the sort of society we want to build beyond that as well. So I'm just going to say a couple of words of housekeeping before I introduce our first keynote speaker. So a huge thanks to our sponsors who enable this event to happen. So particularly thank you to Aptem for being our lead sponsor, and you'll hear more from them a bit later. And thank you also to our group sponsor, Clarion Futures. Your support enables things like this to happen, so thank you. Now, please do ask questions and put in comments and discussion via the app. We'll try and pick up as much of that as possible with all of our speakers, so please do put your questions in there. I see there was kind of, I think about 10 before we'd even started, so I think that's a good sign. So please do keep asking away and commenting too. We've got, I think, about more than 800 people registered for the event, so there's a lot of people interested in the discussions we're going to have. As well as putting your stuff in the app, please do, if you're on Twitter, tweet away. You can tag in the Learning and Work account, which is @LearnWorkUK, and also use the hashtag EmpSkills21. So let's get lots of discussion going. There'll be some polls later as well. And also, you should all have hopefully received an interactive programme via email. So that will give you the sort of agenda for the day, and also lots of links to click into for videos and for our sort of virtual exhibition space as well. So please do take a look at that programme and click in and have a look at all the stuff in there, and some pre-recorded content as well. So that's all I want to say by way of intro, because as I say, we've got a very, very packed agenda. And I think it's kind of fitting, I think, to begin with Mims Davies, who's the Minister for Employment. And given we've had the plan for jobs announced last summer and various sort of additions to that since, a lot of employment support out there. I think restart contracts getting started in the last couple of days or so as well. I'm sure there's many restart providers on the event as we speak as well. And so Mims, we're really looking forward to hearing from you about how you feel that plan for the jobs is going, and also what you think the next steps are in our labour market recovery and renewal as well. So without further ado, thank you for joining us, and I'll pass straight over to you.
Thank you, Stephen, and good morning, everybody. And it's a real pleasure to join you. And thank you so much for inviting me to return today to the Learning and Work Institute's annual convention. Yes, back on Zoom on employment and skills. And it's a real pleasure to be here and share some of my thoughts this morning. Now, as Stephen said, we are starting to see light at the end of the tunnel, and it's truly apt that the convention is focusing on the theme of recovery and renewal following the pandemic. And I'm delighted to represent the government in my role as Minister for Employment at DWP, and I look forward to hearing how the convention goes and all that speakers and contributors have to say. It's really important for us to be in touch with your thoughts. I have been the Minister for Employment under the Jobs Miracle, not quite so much over this last year, but let's remember where we came from and where we hope to head back and actually make things better for people. And I'll come on to that later in my remarks. It's a great pleasure looking through who's on the call, hopefully, who's managed to get through Zoom. Many industry representatives, all of the members at the convention. And it's a real interest, as Stephen said, about how we deliver on the government's priority to deliver a positive recovery, that we recognise the impacts of COVID-19 and we make sure that the UK is more prosperous, is healthier, is stronger than before the pandemic. And that was certainly some of the work that the PM was asking me to do ahead of the pandemic. Look at the barriers, what was holding people back. That hasn't changed. It just becomes even more important. Now, the COVID crisis has both highlighted and deepened, as I say, pre-existing inequalities in the labour market, making the government's levelling up agenda more crucial than before. We need to go beyond what levelling up as a phrase is to what it means. Now, the coronavirus crisis has had a direct and considerable impact, as we know, on the UK labour market, with all sectors affected in some way, some clearly more than others. As a constituency MP, very much related to Gatwick and the travel and the aviation industry, very, very difficult times for many of my constituents. But actually, we've had a COVID economy. We've had some people thriving, busier than ever, and really having to stretch to absolutely deliver and be there for growing areas and growing opportunities. But millions of people have spent a significant time on furlough, working from their kitchen tables maybe, but I'm very conscious many of our young people have either been stuck in their bedrooms working, if that's been how it's been for them, or stuck there wondering what's next for them. But with the unprecedented speed of our vaccine rollout, very pleased to have my second jab brought forward this weekend. We do want people to be getting back to work as quickly and as safely as possible. And I pay tribute to the HSE, who've done 260,000 spot checks, supporting people to work safely, feel positive about going to work. And I'm extremely proud of DWP. I'm here at Caxton House, and as soon as we could get out and about to see our job centre colleagues, I've been doing that. We have pivoted to having more laptops than we've ever known and having people working at home, but we kept the job centres open for the most vulnerable. And I pay tribute to all my operational colleagues who are phenomenal, whatever is going on. And we have absolutely stepped up to the challenge in our department. Now, we need to reverse the increases that we've seen over the past year or so on unemployment, get all sectors moving in. With recent employment figures showing, pleasingly, as Stephen said, an increase in the number of vacancies, but it seems to be the same old people who are looking for people. So we need to be working on that. And we need to really feel that benefit of more people back on company payrolls. And in our recovery, we want people to have access to the same opportunities, regardless of where they live, their background, their gender, and that's why our skills agenda is so important. And I want to take this opportunity to highlight some of the government's wide-ranging and important employment support and skills-focused initiatives, which will support everyone this next step through furlough and as we get into the next stages of recovery. We have specific support for young people. We have specific support to help people move back into work, help people develop and understand their transferable skills and pivot into those new sectors that they want to go into. And we have help for people at any age and any stage of their career. And I want people to recognise that through DWP. I can't stress that hard enough. So in every community, we need to be sharing what Plan for Jobs is. And I'm very proud to be the Minister who's delivering much of this. Now, to date, the government has provided the crucial safety net, record levels to people as far as we can, with measures including the coronavirus job retention scheme. The Plan for Jobs is all part of a £392 billion investment to create support, protect jobs and businesses, and keep people as close to their jobs and their sectors as possible. And that's included the £2 billion investment in our flagship Kickstart scheme. And as Stephen mentioned, just starting as well is our almost £3 billion Restart scheme, which I'm very excited about as well. That's for people who've been unemployed for over 1 year. Now, Kickstart is vitally creating over 250,000 6-month quality workplaces for our young people. Now, those are the people we are targeting to get into these roles, those most at risk of falling into long-term unemployment. We do not want a pandemic generation. Therefore, during each 6-month Kickstart job, employers will also support their young people to become more employable on the next stage if it's not with them. It could include career advice, goal setting, support with CVs, interview preparation, as well as the key experience of developing and identifying transferable skills. We have roles in DWP in Seek Help, working with llamas, vegan chocolate factories, care, construction, heritage crafts, working at Pinewood Studios. And I want to thank the employers and sectors, gateways who've come forward, offering young people some of the most amazing experiences of first steps into work, getting on that employment ladder. Our work coaches are so energized and excited by being able to showcase and get these young people into those roles. So thank you, employers. And don't forget, you can apply direct through the Kickstart scheme or indeed through over our 900 Kickstart gateway organisations and people such as the British Chamber of Commerce, FSB, you name it. People have come forward to come together to make these applications available and possible for companies of all shapes and sizes, all different styles and backgrounds. So thank you very much. Now, Kickstart will be instrumental in allowing more young people to access long-term work, boost their skills and confidence. Hear that word, non-stop in this role for the future. We absolutely need to keep hearing from employers who are keeping those young people on permanently. We're hearing that every day, and we want to see more and more of that. This is a tremendous outcome, and it means that Kickstart, alongside our day-to-day bread and butter work at DWP, is changing people's lives. Now, as of the 27th of May, we have over 219,000 approved jobs in Kickstart. Over 133,000 roles are available to apply for. And over 36,000 young people have now started a Kickstart placement. This is phenomenal and very exciting. We've also significantly expanded support for those who've lost their jobs due to the pandemic, so that they can quickly move back into work. We created our job finding support for those people unemployed for 3 months, delivered digitally with up to 4 hours of extra help, extra over to what the work coaches do, and JETS, job entry targeted support, a more in-depth programme lasting for up to 6 months for those people 6 months unemployed. And of course, as mentioned, the newly commenced £2.9 billion Restart programme, which will additionally be providing support to those who don't find work within the first 12 months and do need that really important extra bit of help to seize that next employment opportunity. And it's been designed very specifically to link into local labour markets and local labour opportunities. And I'm very excited to see this starting to move through DWP, as I say, only opened at the beginning of this week. Now, turning to support to help people improve their skills, we are, of course, opening up opportunities for people in new sectors such as green jobs, digital jobs. And we need to make sure, of course, that the pipeline of people with those skills for employers are there to meet current, crucially, and future needs. We've significantly increased our DWP Sector-Based Work Academy programme to help job seekers across England and Scotland switch into new careers. Now, swaps are one of DWP's most popular forms of support. We know they work because they're built around genuine vacancies in high growth sectors or where there's need, whether it's construction, care, hospitality, or even coming into the civil service. I recently saw one in viticulture, down at Plumpton College. And for people wondering, that's getting into wine growing and getting into the English wine industry. We just had English Wine Week, so I think it's very important to flag that up, particularly as I have great wine growers in my patch. But actually, it's very skilled. We need people there year round. Now, the placements consist of pre-employment training, real work experience placements, and a guaranteed interview with that employer for a real job. In July last year, as part of Plan for Jobs, the Chancellor announced an extra 32,000 SWAP placements would be available through to March 2021, providing an extra 17 million to DfE to triple the number of associated vocational training placements. We've exceeded that target, and we've helped around 40,000 people with SWAPs, and we're going to be doing more this year. Now, since then, DWP's Secretary of State has also committed to delivering the extra placements through to 2022, which will be up to 80,000. So we've adapted SWAPs even during the restrictions to make sure that that training and work experience and learning could be delivered through mediums such as this, so that those opportunities and chances can be taken in local communities. And my department will continue to be agile in working with local partners, employers, training providers, to make sure that we provide opportunities in sectors where there is high volumes of current vacancies, and SWAPs are key. I'm speaking to the hospitality industry yesterday and highlighting this opportunity. And we do know that there is a massive value too in apprenticeships, both for people wanting to learn on the job training and be ready to get into work in the businesses that they're training with. And businesses can now offer new apprenticeships because the government has increased the cash incentive payments to £3,000 now for every apprentice they hire as a new employee from April through to September this year. And that's very, very welcome. We're also supporting the largest ever expansion of traineeships, with the Chancellor confirming an additional 126 million through to 2022 to fund a further 43,000 traineeship places. This is in addition to the 30,000 places funded in 2020 to 2021. So we've extended the incentive payments, for offering traineeship work placements through to the end of July next year. So there is opportunities for employers here that weren't there before to get people into their businesses. And we're working with employers to develop the traineeships that provide the right progression route for moving into apprenticeships or other jobs in priority sectors. Now, some organisations are already pleasingly doing this. They're using great routeways for young people to make sure that they particularly benefit by these new government measures. Now, as of the 4th of May, we have started to deliver the first ever occupational traineeships developed alongside trade bodies and employers in rail. So it's areas such as this that can further get the opportunities through these new measures. And this will really help young people to be prepared for apprenticeships, be ready for sector-based skills that they need, that they're ready for the development in the workplace, that we are working in line with international best practice. And I think we need an honest conversation with young people, with parents, with everybody working these days, that learning alongside earning is totally normal. It will have to happen at any stage of your career. And the more we talk about your learning not being finished at school, that you'll be doing it throughout your working life, I think will be set fair for a really positive next stage. Now, all of this support can be accessed through our newly enhanced DWP Youth Offer. Now, this is available to young people aged 18 to 24 who are in receipt of universal credit and are in the intensive work search regime. And we could be also reaching out to people who are 16 and care leavers. So very aware of the breadth of young people who need support. Now, we are offering a wraparound support through our 13-week youth employment programme. This is complemented by joined-up delivery of support through these new youth hubs. Specialist youth employability work coaches based there as well. And there will be over 130 youth hubs out there. Almost 50 are open now. Many have been operating virtually and are now, but as soon as we can get them fully open, which is imminently, they will be offering skills, training and employment provision, a link into local dedicated services such as mental health support, debt management, help with their housing. And the Youth Hub work coaches will be co-located in these partner premises with local organisations, creating a one-stop shop approach for young people for that vital support. I very often hear, where do I start? And that is why we've pulled together Youth Hubs. I've seen them in Winsford, in Caterham, in Liverpool, and they are operating daily and changing lives. One particular story which stays with me is meeting a young chap in Liverpool in the Merseyside Youth Hub there alongside the local charity, who was a trained chef, wasn't working, everything was difficult, and it transpired he was sharing childcare with his mum of his younger sister. And working with Premier Inn, working with the Youth Hub, working with the local DWP team, he's now a breakfast chef. He can be there for school pickup in the afternoon, and he's using his skills and was beaming about it. And it's those kind of stories every day that really matter. Now, these organisations we're working with in terms of youth hubs will have that depth of understanding of the local skills gaps and needs that employers have. And above all, the opportunity to find out what is that barrier to work. And it's not always obvious, as I've just described. So we need that first-hand knowledge, we need that local joint work, and we need to be helping people of all backgrounds. And that's why our youth employability work coaches, both in youth hubs and in job centres, are there to create that opportunity of flexible support for young people, to understand where there are significant or complex needs, to really understand what are the barriers that might be stopping them getting into employment. And those work coaches will proactively engage with employment advisors, disability employment advisors and local partnership organisations to provide the insight into the needs of this customer group, make sure that there's the right provision available, and really make sure that those who face any additional disadvantage of getting into the labour market have that barrier stripped away. Now, these young people will also be able to access continued support for up to 6 weeks once they start work, once they get settled into the role, and we know that really makes a difference. With the aim of improving the links between the government's employment support skills offer and with DFE, we have also collaborated to create a new offer from DWP, which is Train and Progress. Now, this is relaxing the universal credit conditionality rules. It allows claimants to access a wider range of training, which takes longer than the previously permitted 8 weeks. So we will be targeting growing sectors such as green jobs, digital, etc. If you want to be looking for something new, you need to be training for longer, we can support you through Universal Credit. That will link into the DFE boot camps, and it means that we are much more aligned as government, and I'm hoping people listening will be pleased about that. Now, the government, meanwhile, will be investing £2.5 billion into the National Skills Fund, which will help adults to train and gain valuable skills as well. It will support the immediate economic recovery and the future skills needed, and includes the £95 million of the Lifetime Skills Guarantee Level 3 offer and the £43 million to expand the skills boot camps. I'm particularly interested in how we can help furloughed workers, women returners and other people through these particular new interventions. And as we move further into economic recovery, it's essential that we focus on supporting the growth sectors of the future, as well as the opportunities that we have in the here and now. And we've been working closely with departments responsible for these key sectors and the key bodies to identify and promote opportunities where there is high demand, where is growth opportunities, such as hospitality, construction and adult social care. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to talk about the breadth of opportunities there, whether it's digital or finance or maintenance. There is so much more in those sectors than people believe. And indeed, hospitality were very much pointing out to me yesterday, this isn't a low-skilled industry. This is an industry where you can progress and move forward very quickly and earn very well. So we need to be careful around our language on adding on skills and upskilling, because actually some people can be very skilled already and some people could be missing those key skills. So it's very important when we're trying to build recovery and confidence that we are mindful of that. And of course, the government isn't solely responsible for generating renewal and recovery. In order to create good jobs and attractive career pathways, we need to be working with employers and get them to step up. And that's certainly what I've been doing when talking and engaging with sectors who are looking for people, and they absolutely are. And employers want and must play an active role in helping create the labour market of the future, creating those progression opportunities, those pathways, breaking down myths about their own sectors, which allow people from that most basic entry level to come in and then build a successful career and have that financial security and job satisfaction. And how pleasing to see today's announcement from Nissan, the largest gigafactory in Sunderland, a £1 billion project and 1,600 jobs. So we want everyone, whatever stage of life they're in, whatever age, wherever they are in their career, to have the opportunity to improve their employment outcomes. But with 12% of working age adults in working families remaining in absolute low income after housing costs, we know that having a job is not always enough to lift people out of poverty. And that's why the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions set up the Independent In-Work Progression Commission, led by Baroness Ruby McGregor-Smith. Its remit is to gain a better understanding of the barriers faced by people in low pay and to advise what more we can do to support individuals and businesses to improve pay and quality of work at the lower end of the pay spectrum. But how do we do this in a positive way? So I'm pleased to announce that the report was published today. This afternoon, I'll be chairing a roundtable alongside the Secretary of State and Baroness McGregor-Smith with employers and stakeholders to discuss the recommendations, which will be promoting the culture I mentioned earlier of lifelong learning, of stepping in with employers alongside government to take forward the support for workers, to make sure that we progress and improve the challenges that are local, such as local transport links. And the government will roundly consider the recommendations and respond later this year. And I would like to thank Baroness McGregor-Smith for the review. I think one thing we found from the pandemic is people want to be more resilient. They have worried about Brexit and then a pandemic came along. They've been worried about other things and they've realised something else can come along and they don't want to be back in that position. And that's when I think where we actually turn levelling up from a phrase to an action. So finally, we need everyone, regardless of disability or impairment or background, to be able to find a job that they can work in, that they can get that positivity of a wage package, that they can absolutely feel the benefits of the network and enjoyment that comes with work. I'm totally convinced that everyone's going to be working at their kitchen tables forevermore, but let's take the best out of the pandemic. Let's bust through the presenteeism. Let's keep it inclusive. Let's make sure that we are still productive. We don't always have to have everybody in the room. There is a way of making the best out of this. But actually work and being in work is so important for all of our well-being. So the government has set a goal to see 1 million more disabled people in employment by 2027. And we're absolutely committed to improving the lives of disabled people. And the National Strategy for Disabled People will be published shortly and will be informed by insights, crucially, of lived experience of disabled people, focusing on the issues that they have and what affects them most in all of their aspects of their lives. And employment will be a central theme of the strategy. The strategy's significance is even greater as we build on the UK's recovery and whole society's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm very proud of DWP. We are fit for the future, and we are absolutely going to be reflecting on the past year. It's incredible what we've been able to achieve when we do it together, when we pull together in the same direction with a shared goal and ambition. And we did this by creating the opportunity to support and protect jobs. We need to do that again. We need to do it in a way that we have high skilled, high productivity workforce that has the skills for the future and for the vacancies here and now. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. I mean, there's so much in that, which is because there's been so many initiatives over the last year, and I think I would just join you as well in paying tribute to all those Jobcentre Plus and DWP staff processing that 7-fold spike in universal credit claims at the start back in 2020, and then all the help and support since. I think it's been amazing. And I think we would say a lot of the stuff that you've announced, a lot of the initiatives are the sort of things that, you know, we argued for and others as well. And I think we calculated if unemployment had followed the path of the economy, there'd be another 2.5 million people out of work. And the difference is the furlough scheme and then some of those other things that you talked about as well. So I think there's so much brilliant stuff going on. I know you're a bit tight for time, but can I squeeze in a couple of questions before you have to head off?
Yeah, go on then. They're giving me the face, but I'm fine. Yeah, go on.
This is the good thing about not being in the room. I can't get your private secretary staring at me angrily. I've got 75 questions, but I'm not going to try and ask them, don't worry. So I think some of the questions are sort of getting at the fact that there's a lot of initiatives. And actually last year, I think you spoke, it was like a double act with Gillian Keegan, the skills minister, and you talked a lot about skills here. And I think that's a powerful signal about joining these things up. So can you just maybe say a few people have asked about how do we make sure these are offers for people rather than a sort of long list of initiatives? So how do we get that personalised support and all these things joined up together?
Stephen, you're so right. I mean, you know, all plan for jobs and all these kind of high level things, what do I actually mean to people? So we've got a massive focus at DWP of leaning into what our claimant needs. What does our customer need? And so that's what is at the heart of Plan for Jobs, whether it's JETS or whether it's Restart, whether it's that 13-week employability program for young people. That's what our work coaches are so brilliant at. They get under the skin of what the claimant needs. And so we can actually join up and link what they need and make sure that we've got starting points. And whether it's, you know, mentoring circles and the over 50s offer that we've got, or whether it's Kickstart, it's all there for work coaches. There's suites of interventions, and it's my job across government, working with Gillian, to make sure that as employers and people who want to get people into their businesses and organisations, that we're understanding the needs of the local labour market. That's why everything that we do really does respond to that as well. That's why our outreach is there for our teams. That's why we've got Flexible Support Fund. We can buy in local support and all sorts of other provision if that's what people need. Whether it's a wheel on their car and you see, or bus fare, Flexible Support Fund will help people get started in their job. So I really think we are going beyond the slogans, and that's what people are experiencing when they come into job centres. Job centres are Jobs Community Progression, JCP. And I don't want people to always think that's where you go in times of peril. It is about progression as well. So please make sure you use all our services, and it's really important that we get that message out of what's under the skin in terms of our job centres, because if you know it, you get it, and if you haven't been there for years or you don't know about it, you don't understand it. So we're going to work really hard cross government and cross community to deliver that.
Thank you. I'll squeeze in one last question, if I may, before you sort of get dragged away. There's lots of people asking about Kickstart, and you know, very welcome, lots of good stuff, brilliant examples you gave. But it's due to end in December, and the peak in long-term unemployment for young people is probably next year. So I'm sure you're in discussions with the Treasury about this. But you know, is there a case for extending it? But also, how do we make sure it gets to all those young people who need it? So some people have asked about young people who are out of work but not on benefits, for example, or you know, that sort of. So a question about when it ends, and then also how do we make sure the people who need it get it?
Well, I'm really proud at how agile we are at DWP about focusing on outcomes. I've noticed we've got policy colleagues on the call who are very important, but policy is only as good as what lands. So for me, it's really important that we get those over 100,000 jobs that are being advertised across the DWP network filled. We are looking at other ways of making sure that those jobs do get filled, and with competing vacancies as well. We need to be balancing, jobs that are out there versus kickstart roles and what they could lead to. So there's a lot in this, and we're looking at it non-stop. We've been really agile in the way that we've run and supported Kickstart all the way through. And if we get the 250,000 starts by December, and don't forget, people can be starting in December and not finishing until next summer. And any employers who are holding back, thinking there might be a longer runway on this, don't, just in case. But I do want there to be a clear route way into apprenticeships, traineeships and other jobs. So let's make sure that we look at this in the round alongside the recovery and the wider plan for jobs. Secretary of State and I are looking at some particular small changes which may help, and we'll always do that, because above all, it's about the right young person in the right business with the right opportunity from those brilliant employers.
Great, thanks, Mims. And I think my main complaint about what you've said this morning is that I fear we've lost half the audience as they go to apply for those jobs working with llamas and in winemaking. But that's a minor award-winning English winemakers, I should say, at the risk of betraying too much personal knowledge. But Mims, thank you for your time this morning. We've covered a lot of ground. There's a lot more to cover, and as you say, we've got DWP colleagues later in the event as well. So thank you for your time this morning. Thank you also for all of your work over the last year to try and make sure we get the right support to people and to join up all of that support. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Have a good rest of the day. It's been a huge pleasure. Thank you. Bye for now.
Thank you. Right, so thanks to Mims there. I'm going to move us on now. So just before we introduce our next panel, we're going to open up, I think, as I try to find the right page in my briefing, a poll for everyone to vote on, and we will try and put some more of those 70 odd questions to DWP colleagues as we go along as well, at the risk of losing Jonathan when he realises that. So could we so the poll should be within the app, but if we can open that up and bring that up on the screen, that would be great, please. Right, so there we go. So we've heard a lot from Mims about what the plan for jobs contains and all of those initiatives. So I guess so the question is, what more do we need to do to help employment recover? So are all of those things that Mims talked about enough? Plan for jobs is fine. We've got the stuff there. Do we need to be giving more devolved powers to local areas? Do we need to there we go. Do we need to increase our employment support for those who were out of work before the pandemic? So we talked about those who lost their jobs in the pandemic, but what about before? We didn't get time to talk about disabled people, for example. I'm sure we'll cover that in the rest of the day. Or is it about how we engage with employers too? So please go, sort of get voting away, and we'll bring in the results of that a bit later this morning. So what we'll do now, just as we gather our panel together for the next session, is we're just going to have a short video and word, sort of 45 seconds from our lead sponsor, Aptem.
Aptem is the award-winning developer of software solutions for apprenticeships, employability and skills programs. Aptem products are highly customizable, allowing you to deliver flexible, tailored and personalized programs that are efficient and compliant. Our partnership approach makes us the solution of choice for some of the biggest employability providers, training providers, universities and colleges across the UK, including Lifetime Training, the largest training provider in the UK. Find out how our customizable products and partnership approach can help you.
Right, so thank you, as I say, to Aptem for their support for today's convention. It's greatly appreciated. I think I'm going to, I did have a bunch of graphs to illustrate what I was going to say, but I think we'll just skip straight on to the panel if we can, because I'm conscious of time. So we sort of, my excellent graphs will have to disappear into the ether. This is very sad, but maybe I'll tweet them out later. I think next panel is to talk really about what we do around employment and some of those issues that Mims was talking about, and the recovery from the pandemic, but also where we go next, and including that in-work progression commission that has been published this morning, which we'll all have to go read at some point after the convention. Stay tuned first. So we've got a brilliant panel to discuss these issues. So we have Jonathan Mills, who's the Director General for Labour Market Policy and Implementation at DWP. We've got Julie Nugent, who's the Director of Productivity and Skills at the West Midlands Combined Authority. And we've got Kevin Rowan, who's the Head of Organisation, Services and Skills at the TUC. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask each of those speakers to speak in the order that I can see there on the slide, just to give you fair warning about when I'm coming to you. And they're just going to give us a sort of 5-minute overview of their views about where next for employment, and then we will have a discussion and have a Q&A. So we'll bring through some of the questions that came through for at the start that we couldn't get through all of those 75 odd. But also, if you have other questions or other thoughts as they crop up as people are speaking as well, please do again sort of stick them in the chat and stick them on Twitter as well, and we'll try and get as many answered and discussed as possible. Julie, if I can start with you. I mean, I think West Midlands Combined Authority had one of the lower employment rates of the various combined authorities, and then you've had the impact of coronavirus as well. So employment, I'm sure, must be a big priority for the Mayor and the combined authority. So I'll pass over to you to kind of give your views on where we go next with employment.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. So I think it's fair to say that pre-pandemic, we thought we were going in the right direction. We had started to catch up massively in terms of employment levels were rising, unemployment levels were coming down. We were seeing increases in productivity, increases in qualification levels. So it felt like we were heading in the right direction. That said, important to note that still huge inequalities across the region, not particularly unique, I guess, but we had a big issue with youth unemployment pre-pandemic, and obviously particular groups more affected than others. And I think the other thing worth noting is, whilst we often talk about unemployment, for us in the region, there is a big challenge with people in work, low skills, often low paid, or in vulnerable areas or areas vulnerable to future change. So we had our issues, but we're heading in the right direction. And I think for us, what the pandemic has really done has kind of amplified and scaled up all of those issues significantly. So in some ways, we're saying that the challenge hasn't actually changed. It's still, how do we get young people into work? How do we reskill people? But the magnitude of it is absolutely huge. And so for us, there is only one way of being able to do this, and we think it's doing it locally, where we align partner resources. This area has always been quite confused and fragmented, but frankly, the approach that we're taking in the West Midlands is we cannot afford to waste public money, we cannot afford to minimise our impact. So what we do and have been doing for some time is working really closely as a collective. There's some really good work going on with DWP, both national teams, but also on the ground regional teams as well. We kind of have very regular discussions, lots of joint approaches, which I'll touch on, but also working with them through our local authorities, many of whom have had employment interventions in place for some time. What we think we bring to the table from a combined authority is both helping to bring people together, but also making sure that training is absolutely fit for purpose. So we've introduced lots of shorter, sharper retraining programs. Some of that is your sector-based work programs, but in new areas, so things like healthcare, logistics, sort of moving beyond the traditional recruitment piece that these are often focused on. But also looking at things like our digital boot camp. So recognizing that, for us, it's quite simple. We want to get people back into work and ideally into good work, good jobs. but also looking at how our economy is shifting. So how do we use this as an opportunity to give people newer skills? So for example, digital, we've run several digital boot camps, and they are always do incredibly well. We recruit, we put people into jobs. They have a fabulous rate in terms of attracting more than 50% of participants are female, more than 50% of BME groups. So again, it's helping for us to diversify some of those skills. And we can only do it that way. I think we have some concerns about how this continues to link in. And as I said, I think DWP have been very focused on working with us locally. So making sure that things like Restart, for example, that it adds value to what's already there rather than parachuting in a lot of new training provision. But also being very practical. So at the moment we're working on Kickstart. We have a big ambition for 20,000 Kickstart places in the region. We're not there yet. So one of the things that we're doing is looking quite practically, quite pragmatically at what more can we do to get placements for employers, but to streamline, accelerate the progression of young people into those places. So actually we see it as a good opportunity. And then critically for us, what happens next? So we are pushing for more progression from Kickstart into jobs, into apprenticeships. So I think we see our role, and not dissimilar to other MCAs, is how do we join together the range of different government interventions, the range of support that was already there in a way that makes sense for people on the ground, because I work in this environment day in, day out, and I sometimes struggle to know what's the difference between a Kickstart, a traineeship, an apprenticeship, Subware, so there's lots of stuff out there. It's our job to make it simple, to make it effective, and to really make sure that we're doing all we can to rebuild our economy, get people back into work. And the only way we believe we can do that is through a really, really strong local regional partnership. So I'll pause there, Stephen.
Great, thanks, Julie. I mean, lots that we'll pick up in the discussion there about the sort of joining up point, which I asked Mims about as well, and also I guess the sort of interested in the balance between, in sort of lower employment areas between getting the employment support out there versus how we create the jobs, and then also the sort of might come back a bit later as well to the point around quality of work and good jobs, and kind of links to, you've got productivity in your job title, and as an economist, the technical term for productivity in the last 10 years is rubbish, I think. So kind of how we sort of do a bit better on that and how they link together. So we'll come back to that in the discussion if we may. And I'll bring in now Kevin. And from a TUC perspective, there's kind of an employment challenge about how we tackle unemployment, and then also a sort of, as Julie was talking about and Mims talked about, a sort of skills at work and a productivity at work and a quality of work and progression side of things. So in your view, what do we need to do next?
So just all of the big questions in 5 minutes, Steve.
Yeah, nice and easy.
Well, I mean, morning everybody, and thanks very much for inviting us to join. I mean, it's a cracking discussion, always is at this event. So congratulations to you and colleagues. What do we need to see happening to ensure the best recovery is going to take place? I mean, that is absolutely the $6 million question right now. And in 5 minutes, I'll just kind of maybe point in a direction of a few discussions which maybe can pick up in the Q&A. But the first thing I think is, stop things getting worse immediately. I mean, we've had a very positive and energetic presentation from the minister, and as expected, I guess. But while we've seen some modest recovery, and we ought to acknowledge that there has been some recovery, it isn't in the areas where we've seen the biggest job losses. So there is a huge dislocation in the economy, which I guess says to me that we're a long way from out of the woods yet. Payroll figures for November showed we lost about 1 million jobs, I think, in the economy, a little over that, with the biggest losses being in manufacturing, hospitality, retail and aviation. No surprises there, there's no shock in that. That's where the biggest fall in demand has been. But the recovery shows that only 1 in 8 of those jobs has come back into the economy, with some growth in business services and in the public sector in particular. We would, of course, have seen many more job losses, I think, as has been acknowledged, if not for the furlough scheme. I think 9 million workers at the peak were benefiting from the furlough. 11.5 million workers overall have had some advantage from the furlough scheme. And while we're seeing little indication of significant growth in demand in those sectors where we've seen the biggest falls, ending furlough, or even as we're seeing today, making demanding a contribution for employers, I think does pose a real risk of seeing job losses again in those sectors. And I know this to absolutely be the case in aviation, where there are still 100,000 jobs at risk, and in hospitality and retail, where obviously footfall are critical. And we're seeing predictions of recovery in those sectors lagging way behind recovery in some other sectors. So the first thing is that furlough has got to stay in place while restrictions are in place and while the impact of the pandemic is still very evident. And I think, as Julie was inferring there, we know too that women, black workers, and young workers have been among the people who have been hit hardest by the impact of the pandemic. Those workers who are more likely to be concentrated in precarious employment, where it's very easy for employers to flex hours down or to lay people off. I mean, in fact, there was a period earlier this year where we saw median earnings go up without anybody receiving a pay rise, because we were losing so many low-paid workers from the economy. So we need to fix our labour market so that precarious, low-paid employment is not the normal, natural route into work for young people and underserved groups in our society. 0 hours contracts and low pay is nothing to be proud of. But after stopping the decline, how do we build back better, fairer, and greener in our economy? Well, we have to have the ambition to do so first, and all of those kind of initiatives that Mims were talking about were very welcome. But for me, it doesn't demonstrate any ambition to grow the economy. It's almost managing the decline rather than setting an ambition that's matched by investment to make our economy better in the long term. Now, we're hosting COP26 later this year, but our ambition to create green jobs is an embarrassment across the world economy. It's stilted and insufficient. And the potential is phenomenal. The transformation we need to do in terms of our sustainable future is vital, but we remain well behind the curve, reluctant to invest anywhere near the levels that we need to as an economy and society. And despite the recent growth in public sector, which has been very welcome, our public services remain understaffed and underfunded. At least 500,000 vacancies right across our public services. And no wonder when the government applauds public services one day, but effectively forces them to have a pay cut the next. Over half of all workers in social care don't even have the earnings level to qualify for statutory sick pay. And what an indictment of how they're regarded by the government of the day. Austerity hasn't worked. Investing in public services does work, and that needs to be a high priority for us moving forward. And we do need to underpin our recovery with a new and much stronger ambition to improve skills across the economy. But I'm afraid our approach in the last 20 years has led to the lowest levels of investment and participation in skills since records began. Absolutely shocking state of affairs. Employer investment down 60% since the 1990s, state investment at an all-time low, and the promise of the National Skills Fund will at best recover a third of that loss of investment if it works as best as it possibly can do. So we do need a guaranteed sustainable investment in our skills system. We need improved rights for workers to access learning, a right to time off to train, a right to advice and guidance throughout working life because things change, and an opportunity for all workers to genuinely have the opportunity to retrain and progress in work where they're at risk, where their sectors are at risk, or where their jobs are changing dramatically. And I don't see any of that in our current plans for skills. You know, I don't want to be the kind of flip side to Mim's very positive, energetic, optimistic kind of vision for the future. And I don't want to sound like Oliver Twist, but really we do need more from our government than we're currently getting. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Kevin. I mean, lots in there for us to pick up in the discussion, I think, about I mean, you talked about green jobs. So for example, I know in the US, President Biden has focused a lot of stimulus on those green jobs, and then also tried to deliberately focus it on good jobs and unionized jobs as well. So there's a point about job creation, I think, which I kind of mentioned with Julie as well, and it'd be good to sort of pick that up in the discussion as well, because employment support was one thing, but you need some employment to support people into it as well. And there's a kind of general job creation point there, I think, as well. And then you very handily, we hadn't rehearsed this, but you very handily allowed me to plug a report that we've got out next week, and an event that we've got to discuss employer investment in skills next week, which perhaps the team can kindly plug in the Q&A about employer investment in skills, which is sort of risk of giving the game away, has kind of trended down and skewed towards those already highly skilled, and some government policies kind of reinforcing that now rather than tackling it. So you know, everyone come and join us for that event next week as well. So thank you for accidentally giving me the chance to sort of desperately plug that, shamelessly plug that as well. So I'm going to just introduce our last speaker now, and then we can move into a wider discussion after that. And Jonathan, don't worry, I'm not going to try and give you the 70 odd questions that we didn't quite get a chance to sort of ask MIMS every single one of them. But I guess my sort of summary, I guess, of the labour market over the last year or so is we had that big shock to employment at the start of the first lockdown in spring 2020, and I think DWP did, as I say, did really well in making sure those universal credit claims got processed and people got the money they needed. We've then had sort of unemployment relatively flat since then, which is largely down to the furlough scheme and then the other support that's out there. And we're now, but we've had those different effects on different groups that Kevin was talking about, and younger people harder hit, higher unemployment areas harder hit. And now we're sort of trying to sort of come out of this. So I guess I'm interested in, it feels to me like we're in a sort of bit of a tale of two labour markets at the moment, where we've got unemployment higher than it was, long-term unemployment up about 35%, I think, on the year. But we've got vacancies back above where they were pre-pandemic, and some employers saying they can't find the staff. So I'm interested in your view about what more do we need to do to try and match that supply and demand together. And then also, you know, we talked about, I'm trying not to use the phrase building back better, but, you know, we talked about the sort of the future and beyond the pandemic, and MIMS mentioned the in-work progression report out this morning. So, you know, how do we solve that tale of two labour markets? And then what's your view on the sort of future priorities for the labour market beyond that? So over to you, Jonathan.
Great, thank you. Thank you for organising the event today. It's great to be here. And yeah, I mean, I suppose starting out a bit where you left off and thinking about the journey we've been on over the last year. It's almost exactly a year ago that we launched the plan for jobs, and when we were doing the work in the run up to that, we were looking at, as we all know, the sort of economic forecasts the OBR were producing, with 10% plus unemployment coming through at the back end of last year. From our own practical perspective, our job centres were rapidly reconfiguring themselves to deal with the constraints of social distancing, but also a tenfold increase in demand for universal credit, as you said. And I know for what we were experiencing, lots of partners were experiencing too, and trying to reconfigure their services, trying to work out what their objectives were for a very uncertain period ahead. And like you say, it has, of course, panned out a bit differently from how we feared at that time. That is, I mean, absolutely the support schemes that the government put in place, most prominently furlough schemes, but also some of the support schemes on the business side, some of the relaxations around business rates. There's been a whole range of measures there that have contributed. And also, I would say, if you look under the surface of the unemployment numbers, there's still been quite a lot of churn there. There have been people getting in and out of work through that time, and I'll be very interested to see the evaluations over time. But universal credit is set up to make it much easier for people to move in and out of work in those sorts of circumstances. So it was certainly well set up for that period. We've talked a lot about the plan for jobs. MIMS talked about the plan for jobs earlier. Obviously, we worked at a great pace to get those interventions set up so we could be ready for the worst last autumn. Actually, in practice, with huge amount of support from lots of people on this session today, we've got those interventions in place really rapidly and a bit ahead of where some of the worst of the forecasts of unemployment would be. So schemes like JETS, schemes like Kickstart, even now Restart, have got in place sort of a bit ahead of the game, and certainly the early evidence we see of the impact they're having is really, really positive. But for all of that, I think we're rightly focusing on the challenge ahead, and I think the kind of headline unemployment story has to still be really uncertain. Part of that is to do with what happens as the support measures taper off. What we have seen with the reopening of lockdown measures has been really positive in terms of employers' ability to unlock capacity and to bring workers back. But if you look at the Bank of England, who produced probably the most positive of the major forecasters, they say that the sort of historic levels of uncertainty in their forecast, because it's not just how the sort of end of those schemes impacts. We're doing this at the same time as all our major trading partners are going through their own curve of lockdown measures and vaccinations and so on. So the global economic context will still be there. I think we're in a good place in terms of the path of the pandemic and the vaccines, but there's got to still be some uncertainty as to how that all plays out. So we are absolutely in the mindset of hoping for the best and preparing for the worst here, and our job centres are right at the heart of that. Because to come to sort of specific questions you asked me, questions 71 and 72, I suppose, in addition to the 70 already there. I'm not sure. I mean, there is certainly a lot of complexity underneath the surface of a relatively stable labour force survey unemployment number. I think that's absolutely right. You can see that in terms of the sort of segmentation of the labour market. You can see that in terms of sort of regional impact, and actually it's played out slightly differently from some previous recessions. We've seen London particularly hit. We've seen some really strong vacancy numbers in areas of the country that wouldn't necessarily have been the front runners in other recessions. You can see it in terms of sort of age profiles and so on. And I mean, some of the points that Julie and Kevin were making about the groups who had the toughest barriers to participation in the labour market before the pandemic being hit hardest during the pandemic, I think is really, really well made. And some of the things that our job centre leaders are really focused on, whether that's BAME employment, whether that's older worker participation, and as Mim said, disabled workers participation. So there's definitely something there, but there's also a bit of a classic difference between the rates and the levels here. So what I think we are seeing at the moment, I think a number of commentators have picked this up recently, is a lot of movement in the labour market, a lot of reabsorption into the labour market, employers being taking people back from furlough, taking new workers in, taking up the Kickstart scheme. That flow is really, really strong, but that's a different story from what the level is. There are still a lot of people who remain on furlough, as HMRC data show. There are more people that we classify as long-term unemployed than there were before, and there's a lot of work to do. We've got to keep that pace and that momentum up in the labour market for some months to come, before we can really feel confident that we're on a level footing. But I think we are absolutely confident that we've got the right interventions in place at this stage, but really looking to what the next stage is. And I think the references to in-work progression are really, really important. It's a slightly sort of abstract sounding concept, but really this is about making sure that we're not just getting people into work, but helping them to tackle the barriers that might stop them getting on once they're in work. And it's something we've struggled with in the past. I don't think any other country's got a sort of perfect policy answer on this, but we do have a unique opportunity with universal credit, which, as I said before, keeps that relationship in and out of work. And it's something that the Commission's report today is really interesting on, and something I know our ministers will really want to look at in the future. So yeah, a lot has changed over the last year. I think amazing efforts to get us to the place that we are, but we're under no illusions about the challenge ahead to get through the recovery phase of the pandemic, and really focused on not stopping there, carrying that momentum through recovery into the period beyond that.
Fabulous, thank you. And just on your point about sort of flows versus levels, I think even during the very, very, very strict lockdown of spring 2020, about 1.3 million people started work or changed jobs. So, you know, there's obviously a collapse in labour demand, but still lots of people sort of changing jobs or moving into work. And
of course, there were a number of sectors that needs to hire very heavily during that period. We saw some bits of retail and logistics hiring very strongly. Obviously, a lot of health and social care employment. So there's been quite a strong sectoral story under there as well.
Indeed, yeah. I think I've done my personal bit to boost the logistics industry. At some point, that doorbell's bound to go, but we'll edit that out afterwards. Right, okay. Well, let's. We've got lots of questions coming through and lots to pick up in what our speakers have said as well. So let's keep those questions coming in. Keep voting on the poll. I'm going to give the results towards the end of this discussion. Julie, perhaps if I can come across to you first, please. And you know, Kevin was talking, for example, about how we create jobs, as well as, you know, all the employment support to try and get people into those jobs. So I'm kind of interested in your take as a combined authority about how you're doing that and linking people out of work to those jobs. And then there's one very specific question as well, about if people could have more details about those green skills boot camps that you were talking about. So I don't know if you might want to say a bit more. If there's a link to share, then we can share that afterwards as well.
So absolutely, and the Mayor set out as part of his election campaign a plan for 100,000 job and training opportunities to be created. So we have a number of different ways to do that, including things like looking at, for example, growth industries, so health and logistics are areas, looking at the potential for new green jobs, particularly around some of the kind of clean green transport. We're also looking at things like retrofitting, so working very closely with colleagues across the combined authority where there's responsibility for transport, housing, etc., making sure that we're trying to target good new jobs and green jobs at that. Also part of the kind of Build Back Britain Better, if I got that right. So basically quite a detailed plan looking at where jobs will come from, recognising we have some levers as a combined authority, but a lot of this will need to kind of come beyond us. So there's a big piece for us, touching on a bit of what Kevin said, working with government to make sure that we've got the right conditions. We're pushing strongly for a gigafactory in the West Midlands as well to support our automotive industry. And I think partly then that work to recognise how we can support businesses to grow or to relocate, and then critically for us making sure that we have the right skills in place for our residents to take advantage. So HS2 clearly on our patch, big growth, job numbers expected from there. It's part of our responsibility to make sure that as many of those jobs as possible are filled by local people, and that's not, we can't force, we've tried, we can't force HS2 to only recruit locally. But what we can do is to make sure that they're working through our partnerships and that local people have those skills where it makes sense to do so. And clearly there'll be some roles, you know, engineers with 10 years experience, we can't respond to now. But where there are roles that we can train into, we're doing the same with the Commonwealth Games. We're looking for at least 6,000 job and training opportunities linked to the sectors that will expand once the games are on and beyond. So making sure that our skills system is responding in a very real-time kind of way, and I think that's something, as I touched on, if I just use the example of logistics, an area we've seen huge growth in, not an area that has been easily funded in the past by DfE, so some of the issues around licenses, but for us it's kind of a no-brainer. You know, we have companies that are desperate for drivers that will guarantee jobs for drivers, not even an interview. So we are putting on, it's expensive training to get your licenses. But actually for us, every unemployed person that gets a job working as a well-paid driver for some good companies with good career progression, it is a benefit to the West Midlands. So what we're doing, working across our network of colleges and providers in particular, is making sure that as and when these growth opportunities are becoming clearer, and some of them are still quite vague, that we're responding. And I think with digital, that is a sector that we, again, back to before the pandemic, it's steadily grown throughout. It hasn't stopped recruiting, and making sure that we've got the right provision in place, which is very much, and it's an interesting one for us, it's not necessarily led by qualifications. We feel the qualifications market hasn't kept up. So we have digital providers, and very happy to send around details afterwards, who work closely with employers to understand their skills and recruitment needs, put that provision in place. It's intensive. We work with DWP colleagues, so for those that are unemployed, there's no impact on benefits as they train, and then getting them into jobs quickly at the end of that. And we're seeing huge advantages, particularly for groups of people that, as I touched on earlier, haven't always been reflected in that industry. So it's been brilliant for lots of women returners, for example. So yeah, very happy to share details.
Great, thanks, Julie. And I think also I might be stealing Jonathan's thunder here, I don't know, but I think DWP's partnership announced a month or so ago, I think it was, with Google as well, about sort of Google scholarships for those who are out of work to get them into jobs in various IT sectors. Another good example of the sorts of things we can be doing. And I think actually your answer there, so a number of people asked about what do we actually mean by green skills, because it's a kind of phrase that gets sort of bandied around a little bit, but actually you've given some really specific examples of where there's some, you know, actual jobs and there's some actual skills to link people into it. So,
and just on that, if I may, I think that's really important, because often with skills, we talk about things in a very generic way. And one of the things we say, particularly to employers, is don't just tell us you want green skills, you have to be specific, because if colleges, universities are going to invest in it, then they need to understand. So one area, so again, electrification, something that talked about, but what we're seeing at the moment is a real growth in electric vehicle maintenance. So something like, I'll probably get this stat wrong now, but only 7% of repair shops are able to deal with electric cars, which is tiny and obviously growing. So we've been working with the sector to start developing new provision from entry level right up to, I think, level 4, to give people the skills needed to fix electric cars. And actually that provision is now expanding across the region. It's growing as more and more jobs are created in that. So for us, we've got to be specific to allow colleges, training providers to invest in new provision. And that's sometimes, I think, where we've fallen down in the past with quite generic, we need more engineers, but we don't specify what kind. So for us, that's absolutely part of the solution.
Great, thank you. And Jonathan, I suppose sort of leading on from that a little bit, there's a number of questions about how DWP or how policy and delivery works between DWP and then local government as well. And we have a sort of, you know, most employment programs and Job Centre Plus support is, I know it's kind of locally delivered, but it's kind of the policy is set centrally. But so I guess there's a question about, would you see a sort of potential discussion about more devolution to some of the combined, I'm not sure if Julie's pitching for this separately, but discussion about more devolution. But also, you've also, since 10 years ago, one of the big shifts is we've got these combined authorities, and a number of them in other areas have got devolved powers over the adult education budget, for example. So they've got stuff that you kind of need to link up with. So just interested in your views about how you work with, how DWP works with local government, and is sort of greater devolution something we should be looking at, or is it just about how we stitch these things up on the ground so they work correctly?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, we've seen some brilliant examples of partnership work, including on, I don't just say this because Julie's on the call, but including especially with the West Midlands. And I don't know, I think some of the conversation about sort of devolution and powers can get a bit theoretical. In practice, when I think about schemes like the Kickstart scheme, which Julie referred to, what is going to shape the outcomes? Well, to some extent, it is the framework and the rules that are set. But actually, a lot of it is about what is going on in practice. Where are we sourcing the vacancies from? How are we filling them? How are we aligning them with other partners' plans? And we talked a bit, I think a few people have talked about what's the off-ramp from Kickstart into apprenticeships or other sort of sustained employment. And actually, you kind of don't need a load of new sort of rules from Whitehall on that. Actually, a lot of that is about how the local partners are working together. And I think the key thing we try and focus on is making sure that people are empowered enough to do that. So our senior job centre leaders don't feel like they've got to be referring everything up to command in order to get authorization to do things, but they feel sort of empowered to get on with it. Because I think that just you sort of notice this most when you're in I'm not going to call it, it's not a crisis, but it's a situation where everyone has to move really fast. It's certainly been an emergency over the last year, hasn't it? You notice it when everyone's focused on working at pace. The sort of theoretical conversation about should we change the exact powers around this thing or that thing, that's just going to happen too slowly. What you need is people feeling empowered to solve things. And when you've got people with the right motivation and the right empowerment, it's amazing what you can get done without having to sort of spend ages looking at the rules.
Thank you. And Kevin, we've got sort of several comments and questions coming through about quality of work and about pay, and that's both about the jobs we're trying to create, but also about existing jobs as well. So what do we need to do to try and improve that sort of quality of work and pay and progression, and how do we sort of, or is there even a balance? Maybe these two things go hand in hand between, we need to get people into work and increase in employment, but we also want it to be good work.
Well, I mean, there are a number of things that we need to do to improve the quality of work for people in our labour market. I mean, certainly, prevent the kind of flaw being taken out of the quality of employment, I think is one key issue. I mean, we've seen such an increase in precariety in work and casual employment over the last 10, 15 years that I think, as I said in my opening remarks, certainly young people are seeing that as the normal route into work. Expectations around quality of work have been lowered by the whole issue around 0 hours contract and flexibility. Everybody's in favour of flexibility, but it needs to be an equal kind of opportunity for flexibility, not just flexibility about what works for employers, but taking into account the needs of employees too. But quality of work is also related to your ability to learn and get on and progress in work. And we've seen a huge decline in to plug your event again, Stephen, employer investment in training, participation in training, the lowest levels of in-work training taking place that we've ever seen. I think something like 40% of the workforce now do no training at all for the last 2 years. Just over a third of employers had no training offered by them as employers in the last year. And it's an opportunity for me, I think, to plug the work that trade unions do in this space. We've got a network of 40,000 union learning reps, and the evidence says that where you've got union learning reps in the workplace, the workforce are twice as likely to participate in regular training. Where they don't exist, the government bizarrely took a decision last year to stop funding the Union Learning Fund, despite officials in the Treasury and in DFE saying this is the most successful way of getting workers to participate in training. The union learning model, if you like, has led to more progression for workers, higher pay, more sustainable employment than any other government initiative. And we would say that as a TUC, but actually that's what the government used to say to us before they decided to stop funding. So I'm pleased that we're developing partnerships with combined authorities to try and replicate that work. And West Midlands is one of our forerunners in that. So yeah, another plug for the West Midlands Combined Authority, but we're doing that across combined authorities across England, and we've got a very strong relationship with the Wales government. So there is no one answer to this, but certainly quality of employment starts with your rights and how you're treated by your employer. So we need to strengthen our employment rights, not continue to diminish them. It starts with having the right opportunity to get on at work as well. And we've got really good employers doing some of this, but not enough of them. And it's a partnership with employers, providers, and unions as brokers and facilitators of that good quality advice and guidance and provision as well. But unfortunately, it feels to me like we're going backwards in all of those areas.
Thanks, Kevin. And I think I agree completely with you about the power and the impact of union learning. And that's something we kind of argued for as well. And actually, I think overall union membership has gone up for the last 4 years or something like that. So we kind of got increases in union membership too. And I think if there's one outcome from this panel, it's definitely, Julie, I hope you were noting down all these good comments that West Midlands getting here. It's very important. So we're kind of just at the end of our time. I feel like we've kind of just started to scratch the tip of the iceberg, to mix my metaphors a little bit there. But I'm extremely grateful to Jonathan and to Julie and to Kevin for your time and for such a rich conversation about, you know, where we are now, recovery from that pandemic, and also where we go next, and lots more for us to pick up on in the rest of the discussion as well. So thank you so much for your time. It's greatly appreciated. This is the moment at which the sort of 750, 800 people in the audience would all be clapping and saying thank you, but you'll have to accept the virtual applause, I'm afraid. So, but thank you so much. Just before I introduce our next keynote speaker, I'm going to ask the team if they'd be kind enough to put up the results of the poll that we asked everyone to vote on. Oh, there we go. So a tie. So if anyone wants to get in a last vote to try and tip that balance, sort of speak now or forever hold your breath. We do these things. No one ever says, oh, it's all enough, which is partly because it's never all enough, but also because we all want to do more. So that's not a surprise for me. I think sort of more power for more devolved power. So more devolution, and then that's, oh, there you go. There's live movement in I feel like I should have a swingometer here. So just nudging ahead of support and engagement with employers, and then a hefty chunk of people voting for making sure we get that employment support to those who are out of work before the pandemic as well. I mean, in practice, we probably need to do all of these things and a bit more, I know, but it's helpful to kind of get that sense of priorities from everybody. And thanks to almost 300 people who've voted on that. Must be some local authority people just nipping in there to tip that balance right at the end. Right, so thank you for voting in that poll, and we will have another poll for you shortly. Please carry on tweeting away using that hashtag and asking your questions via the Q&A. I'm trying to bring in as many themes through those questions as possible. And there's also some quite specific points in there about links and things like that, which I'm going to ask the team to see if we can help out with specifically via the chat. But moving on to our next keynote speaker, I'm really pleased that we have Kate Green, MP, the Shadow Secretary of State for Education. Kate, we've been talking quite a lot today about skills, and I've never heard a DWP minister talk as much about skills as we heard from Mims Davis earlier. But we know we've got big structural problems with skills or shortfalls, and Kevin has very kindly plugged several times our employer investment in skills report that the Learning and Work Institute's releasing next week that highlights some of those inequalities in access to skills as well. And then you've also got the effects of the pandemic and lots of people needing to change jobs and potentially update their skills and retrain for new sectors. So there's a kind of a lot going on, and we'd be very interested to hear your perspective and Labour's perspective on what we need to do next for recovery and renewal. So thank you for joining us, and over to you.
Great. Well, thank you, Stephen. And it's always a pleasure to be at the Learning and Work Institute. And I'm delighted to be here today at a time when the future of skills and training could not be more important to our economy. We're now facing some of the most significant changes to the way we work and live in a generation as we emerge from the coronavirus pandemic, which has swept through our economy and our labour market, leaving us at a turning point where we must reforge our social contract. And the economy of the future was already set to become more uncertain, more unpredictable, more fast-moving and more volatile even before the pandemic. Jobs and the skills they'll demand already face the prospect of intense and repeated change over the coming years as a result of a host of factors, Brexit, the climate emergency, the challenge of emerging and growing economies around the world, and high levels of inequality in this country. But while these are no doubt significant challenges, they're also opportunities. The need to respond to a changing economy and deliver a green recovery are a chance for a government with a smart and active industrial strategy to work with businesses to create hundreds of thousands of good new jobs and to build an education system that delivers the skills that working people need. Forging a new settlement in our society and economy, one in which opportunities are available for all, where working people can get the skills they need for a career, not just for a job, and where prosperity is genuinely shared, goes to the very purpose of the Labour Party, a party committed to creating a fairer and more secure economy. Of course, if you listen to the Prime Minister and the Education Secretary, you might think that the Conservatives also have long had further education and skills as their priority. But the warm words they offer now are impossible to reconcile with what they've actually done to our skills system since coming into office a decade ago. They slashed billions of pounds in funding from further education, cut maintenance support, and forced older learners to take out loans to get the skills they need. And the results of these choices were predictable. Indeed, they were predicted right across the sector. Reducing entitlements to learn and cutting the funding to support it inevitably led to fewer and fewer people learning. And as you've shown in the Learning and Work Institute, Stephen, it led to the number of young people in further education falling and the number of adult learners plummeting. And even the government's own research has shown that the introduction of loans for adult learners contributed to thousands of people unable to access the skills they need. The cuts have been a disaster for individuals and for our economy. Because when you can't get the training, education, and skills you need, you have to live with the consequences every day. Every day when you wake up and don't know if you'll be given any hours of work that day, or when you worry that you can't pay the bills or feed your family, or feel that you're trapped in a job that doesn't offer security and progression, it's in no small part because you've been unable to access the education and skills you need to live securely. And when people are trapped in a low wage and low skilled work or can't move into new and growing industries, our economy also suffers. Lower wages mean an economy that is weaker and small, one where working people can't meet the cost of living or use their wages to support other businesses. And that's why the cuts have been such a false economy, socially and economically. Young people have been hit particularly hard, something which was rightly identified by the Learning and Work Institute's Youth Commission, which I was privileged to be a part of. And the problem of youth unemployment is worsening. 1 in 8 people were not in employment, education, or training 5 years after leaving school in 2015. Figures last week show 1 in 7 18-year-old men were not in education, employment, or training last year. And for those who were eligible for free school meals while at school, more than a quarter are not in employment, education, or training. This is a scandal, both moral and economic. And if the government do not act, it will continue to be a scandal into the future. If young people due to enter the labour market now can't make the best possible start to the beginning of their working lives, they risk falling further and further behind as the world of work changes more and more rapidly around them. Now, the government believe that they're on the path to addressing this challenge with the promised lifetime skills guarantee and the lifetime loan entitlement for adult learners. But the reality is that these policies are ill-equipped for the challenges facing our country. Millions of jobs across the economy, including in sectors that the government themselves believe are a priority, aren't eligible for funding through the Lifetime Skills Guarantee. And the promised support is years away from actually reaching those who need it, despite the huge shock that the pandemic has caused to our economy. With furlough now winding down, the risk that many people could find themselves in need of a new job as their old one disappears is immediate. If the government doesn't make it possible for people to retrain in new and growing industries as a matter of urgency, they face being locked into a cycle of low wages, insecurity, and unemployment. The government has the power to change this, but only if they act quickly and get support to those most in need now, not in a few years, too late down the line. But while the Skills Bill, now making its way through Parliament, could be an opportunity to do that and to begin to set right the mistakes of the past decade, I'm concerned that the Conservatives have failed to learn from their record. They don't seem to understand that simply trying to reverse the situation to where it was 5 years ago will not make up for a decade of chronic underinvestment in people and their skills. If our country's to recover from the shock the pandemic has delivered to our economy, and if we're to build the foundations we'll need to thrive in a fast-changing future, access to learning as a right for all, genuine support to retrain and upskill, and putting education at the heart of our economic recovery will be essential. And I don't see any sign of that, I have to say, in the Skills Bill. Labour has long been clear by contrast about what is needed. First, about the urgency of the task. We said the government needed to be bolder and move faster. They need to get in place support to retrain and upskill those at risk of unemployment swiftly. Instead, they've waited until furlough has begun to wind down to bring forward their plans to Parliament. And they also need to ensure that the new funding goes into new and growing industries, particularly those that will have a vital role to play in our transition to a greener and cleaner economy in the future. Yet they've scrapped the National Industrial Strategy. Labour takes a different approach. For us, education is a priority, a lifelong right and a necessity. That's why we've committed to a jobs promise for young people and an ambitious education recovery plan to tackle the impact of the pandemic. It's why our Green Investment Plan has jobs at its heart. Last month, I published Labour's Education Recovery Plan, a plan that would support the young people who are being let down by this government, those without an opportunity to train or a job they can go to. In particular, those young people just turning 18, reaching the end of their education after 2 academic years scarred not just by the pandemic, but by the government's response to it, the exams chaos and a catch-up plan so feeble that the government's own advisor resigned over it. With the impact of the pandemic making it even harder than ever to get the first job at the start of a career, we should be focusing on getting these young people the skills and qualifications they'll need long into the future. That's why Labour's plan includes hundreds of millions of pounds in new investment in further education to fund more places and to increase support for disadvantaged young people, a further education recovery premium, and embedding tutoring in further education. And making these young people is also a priority at the heart of Labour's jobs promise, a guarantee of employment, education or training for all young people who have been out of work or education for 6 months. And that's not just a commitment from Labour in opposition, it's something we're already taking into government. A young person's guarantee, a promise of work, education or training for all under 25s, was at the heart of the manifesto that won Mark Drakeford and Labour re-election in Wales. They're using the power of government to transform thousands of lives for the better, creating opportunities for young people and securing our economy for the future. But we can't stop at that first job. Education is the most powerful and most important investment we can make in a person's life. But it's increasingly clear that we don't make that investment once and then stop when someone turns 16 or 18 or 21. A young person starting work today will still be working in the mid to late 2060s. I can't imagine what the jobs of the latter part of the 21st century will look like, but I do know that the need to retrain and move forward will be essential for individuals and our country's future prosperity and security throughout the decades to come, throughout people's working lifetimes. So while we can't predict the future, we can and must now prepare for it. We can and we must investigate in the education young people receive today, as we've set out in our Education Recovery Plan. We can and we must lay down the foundations of a lifelong learning offer for the future that's accessible and available to everyone. Labour will always make investment in education a priority whenever it's needed, because we know that the return is worth it, with every pound invested in education being seen in a more prosperous and equal economy, in a more secure and fairer society. That's never been more true than it is today. And that's why it's such a pleasure to speak to you this morning.
Great, thank you, Kate. And as ever, lots in there for us to sort of pick up and discuss, I think, and lots of questions coming through the Q&A as well. And I think the point you made about uncertainty, actually, and, you know, never mind sort of 50 years ahead, 18 months ago, I didn't really know what Zoom was. So it's kind of makes the point a little bit. And therefore the importance of lifelong learning being absolutely critical. So I'm going to ask about that, but I might start with young people though, which you talked about as well. And specifically about apprenticeships as part of that. So, you know, you talked about young persons guarantee within Wales, which is along the sort of lines that actually the Youth Commission that you talked about argued for as well. And apprenticeships must be a key part of that for Wales, but also for England. But the number of young people doing apprenticeships in England has fallen from low before the apprenticeship reforms to very low after them, to very, very low in the pandemic. Now you might say, well, this is all employer choice. It's, you know, it's their money, it's their levy pots if they're on the levy, and so we can try and persuade them if we want, but it's their choice. Or, and this is a slightly leading question on my part, you might say we should go a bit beyond that, and there's lots of things you could do. You know, we've argued for an apprentice premium. You could ring fence part of the levy for young people. So I guess I'm kind of interested in your view. Is it just employer choice, and we just got to kind of live with that? Or try and persuade employers, or are there things we should be looking at within the apprenticeship system to boost numbers for young people?
Yeah, the fall off in the number of apprenticeship starts for young people is a real concern. Partly, I think it is perhaps because employers may feel, and I have some sympathy with this, that a 16-year-old or an 18-year-old may need more time to develop some of the softer skills, not necessarily the technical skills, to enable them to move into and really develop in the workplace. And that certainly says to me that we've got to look quite hard at what we're doing in schools to give young people the right life skills so that they're ready to make that move on into work-based career development. And it also says to me it's very important that we're offering the right careers advice in schools and colleges so that apprenticeships are seen as the right and the desirable choice for young people who could benefit from them. It's interesting that parents, a majority of parents now say they'd prefer their child to go for a vocational route rather than to university, and that's because there are some really great apprenticeship opportunities and parents can see that. But I think there's a huge lack of knowledge still in our school system to enable teachers and advisors really to route young people to those opportunities. I'd also say that I think there's clearly a flaw, several flaws in the design of the levy, and one of the flaws is that, of course, it allows employers to use funds actually to go on upskilling and retraining already highly qualified, highly skilled workers. We need to make the levy work more effectively, really, to reach the people who most need to benefit from it. And clearly that includes young people. I dispute, I guess, the analysis that the levy is just employers' money to spend as they like. Let's be honest about what the levy is. It is effectively a form of taxing employers to recycle the revenue into workforce development. And I think that gives the state a bigger stake in how that levy money is spent than simply leaving it to employer choice. And I think we've got to be bold about that. Obviously, that requires us to have a really open and transparent discussion with employers, with business, about what the economy and skills needs of the future and their needs are going to look like. But I don't think leaving it to employer choice is actually true to what the levy really ought to be about, and in my view is about. You will know that we've made some suggestions for better use of the levy monies, including last year we proposed a wage subsidy to encourage and incentivise employers to take on new apprentices, including young apprentices. I also think that there's more that can be done with the levy, for example, in terms of things like looking at how supply chains can access it, supporting a better pooling, if you like, perhaps at regional or sub-regional level. And I know there's a lot of interest in this conference, which I share, in how we can have more effective power for regional skills strategies to be passed down to metro mayors, metropolitan combined authorities and local authorities. So I think that there's lots more to do to make the levy work effectively, really to get the money where we want it to get to offer better apprenticeship opportunities to young people and those with lower levels of qualifications and work experience. But I don't think it's right that we should have that discussion without employers. Of course we should. And of course, the other thing I would just say is that we need to recognise that the levy works better in some sectors than others. You know, it's perhaps not working as well as it could, for example, in some parts of the public sector. We certainly need to be, I think, examining the levy system very critically to enhance and develop it so that it can really be effective to create opportunities for the future.
Yeah, no, I think there's kind of, I think the government is I think the apprenticeship levy is a really good idea, and there's lots of good stuff within that, but I don't think it's ever been articulated what the purpose of it is. Is it to increase apprenticeships full stop and then, you know, whoever, wherever, or is it to level up, to coin a phrase, sort of opportunities for those who get the least? And that's kind of getting to the heart, I think, of what you were saying about, you know, this needs to be a collective discussion about that, and then the decisions flow from that. And you were talking now about the role of local government and combined authorities, for example. So I'm going to just maybe ask you about that. It feels like some of the reforms that we've got going on at the moment are more about central government having control over things than local government, or, you know, or people, for example, learners. So, for example, you mentioned the lifetime skills guarantee, which I think is a really good thing, giving people a chance for first level 3. Kind of needs to do the level 2 and basic skills thing as well. But also, it's for a specific defined set of qualifications, as you said, decided by the DfE for the whole of England, and excludes lower productivity, lower pay sectors that you might think might benefit from some level 3 training, for example. So one approach says, well, we need to define these things, and we'll have plans set by groups of employers, and then the Secretary of State will hold colleges and others to account, and we'll decide which qualifications people can do. I'm posing these as two extremes. The truth's probably somewhere in the middle. And then there's another thing that says, well, actually, we've just been having a panel discussion about joining up skills and employment with, we're not allowed to call it industrial strategy anymore, but the sort of growth approaches or local industrial strategies or whatever. And therefore you kind of need Greater Manchester or West Midlands Combined Authority or whoever to have more of a role shaping that, and then give people more choice. So I'm kind of interested, there's obviously lots of specific policy decisions that you'll have to make in terms of your proposals, and then should you be in government. But I'm interested in the sort of instinct about where Labour's coming from, about that balance between a kind of national system versus a local system.
Well, I think we've been very critical of the over-centralisation that is explicit, not just implicit, but explicit now in the Skills Bill. And you will see, if you're following the passage of the bill currently going into committee in the House of Lords, that we've tabled a number of amendments, including some that call for a role, a much more clearly defined and significant role for local and metropolitan combined authorities. And that's because, you know, I think it's impossible to prescribe the skills needs for the whole country from an office in Whitehall. The skills needs in Greater Manchester, where I'm an MP, are going to be rather different from the skills needs in rural Norfolk, or in perhaps parts of the country which have suffered huge deindustrialisation, but may have access to lots of digital and creative jobs. We really need to understand different labour markets and the way they're developing, and that's going to be understood best at local and regional level. And I also think, you know, if you believe in devolution and the logical consequences of devolution, is the interplay between the strategies that those local and regional authorities can have for industrial and economic strategy, for social policy and their equality and inclusion strategies, for education and skills strategies, and for health and well-being strategies. Those strategies all sit together. And I think if you try and pick out one brick in that wall and say, well, we're going to take that bit from Whitehall, you actually undermine the whole concept of the devolution settlement. And I think the Skills Bill has really completely failed to recognise that. I don't think if you talk to DFE officials, I don't think it's necessarily that they mean to do that. I think they have not understood the integral nature of devolution and the way it works in an area like mine in Greater Manchester or in the West Midlands or elsewhere in the country. And I think it's not just, of course, in terms of the things like defining which courses will be covered by this lifetime skills guarantee. You see it too in the centralising approach to giving the Secretary of State powers to determine who will be the providers. And that's a really strange way, I think, to set about trying to grow local provision. Now, in fact, in Greater Manchester, some of our biggest providers, Manchester College, for example, don't just provide in our local city region. You know, they're making an offer across a wider geographic footprint in other parts of the country. So I think there are some real inconsistencies in the bill, because the bill is saying, well, you know, employers in that local region are going to dictate to local providers, and the Secretary of State is going to be able to have an overall grip on which providers can be on that footprint. But if you were to ask the Greater Manchester Chamber of Commerce to determine what skills needs and what providers should be offering for Greater Manchester will be the case in the future, first of all, the Greater Manchester Chamber of Commerce will tell you they don't really think they should have that primary role, that they want to be part of it, but they don't think it's their role to do it, contrary to what the bill thinks. But secondly, what interest does the Greater Manchester Chamber of Commerce have in the provision that the Manchester College is offering in other parts of the country? None whatsoever. So I think, you know, we've got an over rigid system coming from the centre, both seeking to limit the power of local areas to determine and work on what is best for them, but at the same time failing to recognise that it's not always just about locality, that some of the providers are doing things beyond that locality. And if the Secretary of State's decision is based narrowly on what he thinks they ought to be doing in their local area, he may be undermining some of what their strengths are. So I think this bill has got all sorts of inconsistencies and rigidities in it that we really need to unpick. And you know, I very much hope that as the bill goes through the Lords and then comes to the Commons later on this year, that, you know, we will be able to make some amendments to improve it, because I fear that what we've got is something that is ultimately going to be quite unworkable and less effective than it needs to be in all parts of the country.
Yeah, I think that the point about systems thinking, I think, is really, really critical and so often gets missed between departments, but actually in some cases within departments as well. So I think that's kind of a point well made, and it's partly about the bill, it's partly about policy and what comes in the spending review, and then it's partly about delivery and accountability as well, I think. And we're just, sorry, I'm aware we've got only like a few minutes left, and I've probably got 350 questions that I'm supposed to ask you, but so maybe if I can just ask you one more, because you talked about lifelong learning, and that was in the context of people having longer working lives and needing to change careers and update their skills. And then of course also learning has so many other benefits beyond jobs and careers, about health and well-being and just for its own sake, and all of those sorts of social capital, making friends, all of those sorts of things. So I guess I'm sort of interested in your, the white paper was called Skills for Jobs. So there's kind of a very labour market focus, which is really important. I'm not underplaying that, but it feels to me education and learning is a bit broader. So again, that's a very leading question, apologies. But so your view about that sort of purpose, or what lifelong learning is there for. And then also, as you say, we've got 1 million lost learners over the last decade as the funding's been cut, and it's now increasing, but not to the extent that it's been cut back previously and focused on particular things rather than more broadly. So what's lifelong learning there for, and what do we need to do to revitalise it and to find that missing million back again?
So I think very clearly one of the things we need to do is make sure there's adequate funding in the system. And we have seen, cuts of 40–45% to the post-16 sector over the last decade. We can't build this recovery on sand. It's absolutely essential that funding boost reaches the front line in post-16 and adult learning. And that's why if you look at our education recovery plan, we have talked about a specific boost to funding in the FE sector, for example. I think too, you're right to characterise lifelong learning as a journey that actually begins in the early years and proceeds through school. And we've placed emphasis therefore on the widest possible components of a recovery strategy, recognizing exactly the point you make, that its purpose, education's purpose is of course to get people the opportunity of great jobs, great careers, and that is important. It's vitally important to me. You know, my working life, my job throughout my working life has always been a big part of my identity. I think that really does matter to people. But it's for more than that. It's for enrichment. It's for fulfillment. Learning is good for mental health and well-being. It's a social experience. We learn together. And if you look at our education recovery plan, you'll see a big emphasis on social and emotional well-being and investing in that element of how we need to address the learning recovery. And I think we've got to give people a sense of entitlement to lifelong learning. One of the ways you do that is simplify access. And, you know, it's incredibly difficult, I think, for people to understand, you know, even 16-year-olds leaving school their parents and teachers can be pretty confused about the options. It's perhaps not surprising that we're seeing Lord Baker seeking to reinvigorate the Baker Clause, because clearly he's rightly concerned that people don't fully understand the options available to them. And imagine how much more difficult it becomes to understand those options the further you are from having participated in full-time education. Imagine if you're thinking in your 40s and 50s that you need to go back into learning. The barriers, first of all, to understanding the landscape are so high and so complicated, let alone, you know, the sort of psychological challenge. You know, it's a brave thing to do, to go back into learning later in life. And I think we've got to recognise that the form of learning that you might be comfortable and indeed capable of going back into, given all your other domestic and family commitments, isn't necessarily going to be to go back into the traditional classroom. That's quite likely to be difficult for a lot of adult learners. So we've got to have a really flexible offer. We've all learned to do everything on Zoom over the last 18 months, haven't we? Including learning. Let's embrace this technical revolution as a hugely useful new element of the way in which people can learn and in which we can engage them in learning. I'm massively in favour of face-to-face learning, but you know, we can do so much alongside that with digital learning and opportunities. And I think especially perhaps for adult learners with other commitments to fit into their lives, this opportunity for online learning is something we've really got to develop and invest in. So it's actually a hugely exciting time, I think, for the sector. And I get the sense of that excitement when I come to your events, Stephen. But what the sector needs and deserves, and what individual learners need and deserve, and what our economy needs, is absolute commitment, vision, and financial underpinning from the government. And I know that's what you will be pressing for. It's what we in the Labour Party are pressing for. I think everyone agrees that it is important to do this. But when we say that you know, education is our priority in the Labour Party, we fund it. The government needs to do that too.
Fantastic, thank you, Kate. And I think that sort of vision of lifelong learning and that sort of journey and kind of where it starts and you kind of you don't necessarily, even if the purpose of it is jobs, that's not necessarily where people start, you know, and actually the purpose is broader, as you said. I think that vision is something that a lot of people will agree with on the event. And I think what you have people here and of course from the Learning and Work Institute is a group of people who kind of want to support you in developing that vision and thinking through, well, what do we do about it and how do we build it? So I think I'm going to make an open offer on behalf of 700 people now, which I probably shouldn't do, but I'm sure everyone will kind of want to input and to work with you as you continue to work up that sort of policy vision and proposals as well. So thank you so much as ever for your time and for covering such a wide range of topics as well, and some kind of really big issues. So we're very grateful for that, and we look forward to continuing to work with you. Thank you, Kate. Okay, so before I just move on to our final panel, I'm just going to ask the team if we can please open up our second poll for everyone to have a vote on. So it follows on really from what Kate was talking about there. So what should be our top skills priority? What do we really need to focus on? So I didn't get time to talk to either the panels or keynotes so far about the decline in participation in basic skills learning. So I know that was asked about on the app in the Q&A. So 9 million adults across England lacking good literacy or numeracy. Participation's really dropped off in the last 10 years. So should that be the priority? Should it be increasing apprenticeships, particularly for young people? So that's something we talked with Kate about there. should it be actually the government's plans around employer-led local skills improvement plans and trying to get provision in line with what those groups of employers say in their plans? Or should it be the lifetime skills guarantee as currently constituted? It's probably all those things and then some slightly different things as well, but we have to force you into making a choice. So please do carry on voting away. And as we get towards the end of the next panel discussion, I'll bring in the results of that as well. Right, okay, so following on from what Kate was talking about there and some of those really big issues that we were talking about, we've got a brilliant panel to discuss and talk about some of those. So we've got Jane Hickey, the Chief Executive of the AELP. We've got Sharon Blyfield, the HR Business Partner of Coca-Cola European Partners Limited, and Richard Alberg, the Founder and Chief Executive of Aptem. So Jane, perhaps if we start with you, there's kind of some immediate issues around the learning and skills and employment systems, and then there's also like those kind of longer term things that we were talking about there with Kate and with others before. So what's your perspective on where we really need to focus? What should our priorities be?
Unmuted. Good morning. It's lovely to be here, and thank you for inviting me. It was great to hear Kate just now with talking about some things which are very close to AELP's heart, actually, in terms of what needs to be done long term. I think that the first thing to say is that we do need to recognise in the immediate future that we're still in a pandemic and we're not out of it, and that we need to take account of that. But if we look at what the priorities might be, I think there are really three things. What the first is about making sure that that people can access good signposting to opportunities, and that's, you know, starting in school. We've got a very complex system that both employers and learners have to navigate through, and then there's the issue of the implementation of decent IAG in schools. So I think that's one. The second is sustainable funding for skills programs. You know, we had the response in March to in the plan for jobs of the investment in traineeships and in apprenticeships, and they have had an impact. But I think we need to take a closer look at what we need to do there in terms of, for example, opening up the market for traineeships to hit the target set by the Chancellor, and that means increasing the number of ITPs who can be engaged in traineeships. And then the other thing is recognising that while there is we're seeing some improvement around the take up of apprenticeships, actually we need to focus on the younger age group and make sure that we continue the incentives that are in place for apprentices beyond September when they come to an end. And I think third thing, Stephen, is about the whole levelling up agenda, and it's about, and Kate touched on it when she talked about, you know, the rigidity of the system. We need to recognise that there is a role for the role of all providers in going forward, and that we make sure that we have, you know, that providers and colleges across all areas of the country are able to meet that employer and learner demand. So, you know, the whole levelling up, recognising the role and impact of independent training providers, that they don't just deliver apprenticeships, they also deliver, you know, they deliver study programmes, they deliver ESF. So there's a whole range of stuff, and I think there are parts of government which don't recognise that ITPs deliver beyond apprenticeships, and I think that we need to have a focus on that.
Great, thank you, Jane. I think lots for us to speak up on there, and Kate talks about sort of Baker Clause, for example, in relation to IAG, and the extra traineeships money that we talked about earlier is really welcome, but it took a staggering amount of time for the DfE to even allocate the money to any providers, let alone for any young people to get on those traineeships. So I think there's a delivery point there as well as a sort of policy point, isn't there?
Yeah.
So we'll kind of pick up on some of those in the discussion as we go. But Sharon, perhaps if I could come across to you next, and I've talked before about some of the work we do with employers. They generally want to engage and kind of recognise the importance of skills and investing in people, but somewhat bamboozled by a bombardment of initiatives and sort of saying, well, what do you actually want me to do? So I'm kind of interested in your perspective about how all of that kind of works from a policy perspective, but also perhaps picking up on a challenge we had from the TUC in an earlier panel about the fact employer investment in general in skills has fallen since 2011, and how do we change some of that?
Hi Stephen, hello everybody, good morning. Thank you for letting me be part of your panel this morning. I think it's a really, really interesting question from a whole skills investment, the whole matrix. That's probably the best way I can describe it now, of initiatives that are out there. And I think we as an organisation have had to kind of create our own golden threads to bring this all together, because there has been so much. There are so many fantastic initiatives that were announced last year. But as a business, you have to focus on what's going to deliver the skills for the future for you, and how can you ensure the quality of support that you can give to a young person. And for us at Coca-Cola, now Euro Pacific Partners, we have invested hugely in our early careers infrastructure, because we absolutely recognise that this is a generation that's going to lead our organisation into and beyond, the next 100 years again for us. And so things like the apprenticeship programme and the opportunities that come with that have been absolutely invaluable. The government's Kickstart scheme, we are ensuring we have placements for a lot of those young adults that don't have the skills that we require, and so we're heavily investing in the skills that they actually need as a basic entry level into the workplace. And we've also this summer done some traineeships within that. So I'm sure you can imagine that whilst, as Jane has quite rightly said, we're still going through a pandemic, we're trying to put the pieces of the jigsaw together that ensures that the intended audience here receives those opportunities within us. But one of the things that I find is that there is conflict, it's fair to say, with the various departments, because they all have their different schemes that they're working through. And actually, my message to the departments is, please, can you kind of come with more of a joined up approach and a joined up thinking, because you're all trying to do the right thing. You're just trying to do it opposite to each other within it. Interestingly, your point there about investment dropping off. In actual fact, when I think about the food and drink sector and the networks that we operate within, I've seen greater investment, especially in that 16 to 24 year age category, and I suspect that's probably more to do with the highlighting of the unemployment, and that group's going to be particularly affected by the pandemic and has been affected by the pandemic. But actually there is a real motivation to embrace the opportunities and to create more positions for young people to come into. But one of the skills that I have noticed, probably more so in the last 6 months, that has been lacking from all of the programs, and I know T-Levels is designed to help and support this, is they talk about digital natives, and that these people who have grown up with in the digital environment. That's great. I know how to switch on a computer, I know how to use an iPhone, and I know how to use social media. But when it comes to doing things like the corporate emails or using SharePoint services and things like that, we're not teaching our young people how to do any of that. We have an expectation that when they come into the workplace and the environment, that the employer will do that. So when we look at all of these pre-employability skills that a lot of these initiatives such as traineeships are supposed to be driving, there is a big gap for me in that side of the skills that they need to learn. But we are definitely investing, and the food and drink sector clearly has been one of those sectors from the manufacturing side that has continued throughout the pandemic and has continued to create opportunities throughout the pandemic. So for now, I'll leave it at that, and back to you. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Sharon. And I might just ask you a question just before I move on to our last speaker as well, actually. So So Sharon White, so your first namesake there, who I think is the chair of John Lewis, she kind of hit the headlines recently by, she was talking about sort of lower than needed numeracy skills of new entrants into John Lewis. So I'm just interested in, because you were talking about the sort of skills of new entrants into your company. So I was just interested in your perspective about that, and whether things like traineeships, are they kind of hitting the goal for what you need?
So for us, the traineeships that we've done, you know, we've worked in partner with one of our training providers, did hit what we needed for that lower expectation at this point in time, because it was a pilot. We've not done it before, so we wanted to see how it would work. The whole maths and English, I think, is going to be a big challenge, because we've also seen with some of those coming on to Kickstart that they don't have the basic maths and English. But I am a firm believer and advocate that that's something we can support when they're in the workplace, because if they have the will to and the desire to want to learn, you know, we'll take them through the maths and English. So yeah.
Great, thank you, Sharon. Right, so if I move to our final speaker now, so Richard, I'm kind of interested in your perspective about what we need to do in terms of reskilling for the recovery generally, but you may also want to pick up, you know, Kate talked, for example, about sort of digital learning tools and the sort of ways we've all adapted over the last sort of 18 months or so, and how potentially that's got much more opportunities for the future as well. So Richard, over to you.
Thank you very much. And I did find the earlier sessions very helpful, as well as listening just now to Jane and Sharon. I mean, look, I speak as an entrepreneur, so I run a company. I've been working in the human capital space for about 30 years, and seen various aspects of it, both technology, working for employers looking to hire, technology now heavily used in vocational training and also employability, and also I co-founded a reasonably large training provider. So, and as an employer, we have all the issues of, we've got 80-something personnel, we've got all the issues that go with it. So my observations are a few things, especially in the context of COVID. The first thing is the employers, forget public sector, it has its own drivers, but almost any commercial enterprise now in business is different now as a consequence of COVID. It survived because it changed. If they didn't change, they wouldn't be around. They've had, even if their core business models remained the same, how they operated fundamentally changed. And that's going to be increasingly obvious as sort of our economy hopefully starts opening up post-July. I think we've got a real issue of, we don't know what the furlough population looks like. You know, the observation that long-term unemployment is corrosive, I don't know how corrosive being furloughed is for a year plus. Yes, you may not have been on the breadline, but it can't have been a lot of fun, especially if you had the sense that maybe your job wasn't going to be around once furlough ended. So the sorts of individuals who may need reskilling and their mindset approaching it may not be everything that people are hoping for. I think there was an interesting point, you know, and I do, you know, the whole levy thing, whatever. Trust employers to act in self-interest. It may be selfish, but we need skilled people in our business at all levels, and therefore we will likely follow the path that leads to getting the people we need. Now, that is different perhaps in the commercial sector from the public sector, but in the commercial sector, you do what you do to survive, and those who don't survive, and therefore by definition don't remain as employers. So, you know, skills are important. I mean, you'll really struggle to find an employer that doesn't believe that. So my observation, which we can get to in a moment, is there will be a whole group of people who are left behind by the changes that are taking place, and government absolutely must put in place programs to support them, because it's not in the self-interest of most employers to do that. There will be some organizations that will, but they'll be in a minority. Most employers will be chasing after the skills they want and not worrying overly about those that aren't of interest to them. So I think what we're going to see increasingly is, you know, a need to reskill, you know, Sharon's point, spot on. Just because you can do Instagram does not mean you can do SharePoint. I mean, you know, and that's a real issue because we don't do too much Instagramming in the company. So, you know, how you train is changing with technology. And I think the biggest thing is, you know, the government's used the very blunt instrument of policy with training and failed to understand how data can support intelligent segmentation. And, you know, the understanding of individual learners' needs. And especially if you could do things remotely, it's no longer about the physical location of an institution that's involved in delivery, as in my local college, but could be the specialist provider that can deliver remotely. I suppose there's another area, and AEB absolutely epitomizes this. How the hell can any provider plan if they've got no idea whether they've even got a business next week? And especially coming from a technology perspective, the stuff we do costs millions. You know, I've got, I don't know, an 80 people company, 40 of them will be developing product. Now, if you're going to make those investment decisions, you need to know what you're investing for. You need to have some sense as to the future. Equally, if you're a provider looking at curriculum, if you're looking at training your own staff, they too need to be trained and developed. Why would you invest in curriculum if you've got no idea if you're going to be delivering that new program that's coming down the line? So the whole area of facilitating, especially where you're looking to scale things, it's far more about investment up front and then lower variable cost to run. So the design has far more impact than necessarily, you know, just saying, well, now you've got, you can just immediately get up and running. And I think from a technology perspective, that's really important. And I hope that that's heard. And then finally, just an observation, forgive me, but one thing that's absolutely apparent is the benefit of moving up a level. Go level 2 to level 3. I don't know, that's 10, 15 grand a year, extra income. It's not a huge amount of training, but 10, 15 grand a year at that level is a big difference. It changes the individual's life, their family's life. The employer makes a huge difference, and to the economy and productivity, it makes a huge difference. And therefore, my observation, again, listening to what's been said, is I cannot see an argument against vocational training. It doesn't matter whether it's level 7, it's still valuable. It doesn't matter whether the person's 45. They can still benefit and have a career ahead of them. The principle that if an employer is willing to get behind a training course that suits them, and an individual is willing to invest his or her time in learning, to me, that's just a good thing, whether you're 16 or whether you're 60. So I really resent that whole this tension between, you know, right now there's ample funding, so the levy's not fully spent, but there was a time when it looked like it was going to be overspent, and this tension of who gets it. And I say this as my company, we're the largest provider to universities in this country, and therefore we see all of the issues with universities investing in degree apprenticeships, not knowing whether that was going to be funded or not. So forgive me, I've strayed a little bit broader, but the whole aspect of, you know, technology and investment does require some clarity.
Thanks, Richard. No, we're very happy you've strayed a bit broader. As the one thing that slightly sort of put me off there is I fear I can do SharePoint but not Instagram, so the other way around to what you said. But anyway, I'll think about that later. Jane, can I perhaps come across to you to sort of pick up the discussion, and do keep there's lots of chat going on in the chat, and keep the questions coming through as well. There's a number of people asked about the sort of local skills improvement plans, and it's like, we kind of, the government looked at the skills system and thought the one thing we need is another acronym, but how that kind of fits or doesn't, does that mean the death of skills advisory panels, combined authority things? And is a point about sort of centralisation, I suppose, versus localisation, and employer-led versus more local government or national government led. So what's your kind of instinct about where we're heading, and any concerns with that?
And can I just pick up a couple of points there? I just want to pick, I don't think you'd imagine that I'm going to get out of this without mentioning functional skills, which you and I have talked about over and over and over the past year, and the lack of parity there in the treatment of learners in a work-based learning environment. But to Sharon's point, actually what AALP has been calling for time after time is greater investment in maths and English, because actually when a school leaver comes out of school, if they're based then with a training provider, the training providers, and they don't have the basic literacy, numeracy skills, the training provider is expected to rectify in a year what statutory education hasn't been able to do in 11 months. In 11 years, I should say, and they're expected to do all of that for £471. What we're saying is should at the very least be equal to the classroom rate, and that speaks to Sharon's point about, you know, you may be a digital native, but can you write an email properly, and can you communicate properly in that way? And then to Richard's point about adult education, you know, what it needs to be simplified. Too many pots, too much procurement. There's a good case for multi-year contracts so that actually people can plan. And what we need to do there is to also to rationalize it and recognize that, you know, not just 10% of this should be going to ITPs. Let's recognize what independent training providers can bring to the table as well. And that speaks to the whole levelling up agenda. On the, sorry, and I strayed a bit there, Stephen, so you're having a hard time with us this morning. But on the local skills improvement plans, I guess what are, you know, we absolutely, we rather speak about employer focus rather than employer led. And from any of the research that we've done, what we know is that we did a piece of work called Employers in the Driving Seat. They don't want to be in the driving seat. They want to be part of a partnership. We also need to recognize that, as Kate said when she was speaking, what, you know, who determines the skills in the local area? Well, actually, and who then delivers. So we are in danger of becoming very rigid and then not actually meeting long-term the needs of a local area. So for example, if a skills plan is determined and you have a certain number of providers who can only provide, who can do the provision in that area, and it's fixed to that, and there is a change in that locality for whatever reason, where's the flexibility? So my concern is about flexibility. My concern is about not recognizing the sort of the breadth of a delivery from all providers. There is a place for a college, there's a place for adult education, there's a place for an independent training provider, and let us recognise that.
Great, thanks, Jane. Yeah, I can't let Richard stray and then not let you stray. So Sharon, guess what that means? I'm gonna ask Richard a question just before I come across to you, okay. Sharon. So Richard, you were talking about you know, employers are going to make decisions that are in their interest, which is just absolutely right. I completely agree. And you know, they're trying to run their businesses, so you've got to tough it up at the best of times, and this is not the best of times. And then there's a few sort of people making the point in the chat about yes, but also employers are often making decisions about now or at best the medium term, but also we've got the needs of the country and the needs of individuals and those longer term ambitions for where we want to get to, as opposed to what markets perhaps look like now. So I'm kind of interested, you've sparked up a bit of a debate, which is what we wanted. So I'm kind of interested in your balance between, you know, individual employers making decisions that work for them, and ultimately that's going to give people jobs and pay rises, but also how we balance that against longer term ambitions, and we don't quite know where the world's going, and we don't want people to miss out who've missed out before.
It's not simple, is it?
A nice easy question for you.
Yeah, clearly there needs to be some element of forward planning. I am a little bit of a cynic about the government approach, because I sort of think back to, well, how often has it made long-term plans and delivered training that employers then want, you know, and so often, and especially while things are moving at the pace they are, you know, it's very hard to centrally plan for a skill set that's going to be required in 4 or 5 years' time, because no one really knows. Now, the thing about vocational training is, you know, there will be some people who have been a Thatcher and then suddenly decide that they're going to go into IT, and that's fine. And the beauty is you probably can do that within 6 months to a year. It's not, you know, there are courses out there that deliver that change as possible. But I come back to, overall, if you let it be employer driven, you're far more likely to get the things employers want. And yes, it will pivot and evolve. And I'd be far more interested in government putting in place the basics of school to get it right, so individuals do leave without, as Jane observed, after 11 years not having basic skills, or as Sharon observed, not knowing how to use the tech that companies, you know, employers use. But at the second level is quality. I mean, that's an area where I think government can have a real impact in our space. You know, It will be bandit territory if you just throw money at the problem. There will be people who do poor delivery, just taking advantage of short-term opportunity and then exiting. That is in no one's interest. But if you can get the quality right, to me, I think at the end of the day, it's vocational training, what employers want for the jobs that they are hiring to. And I have no great insight into what's going to be hot in 15 years. Yeah, we can talk about green economy and whatever, but anyway, I mean, I get it. There are areas of grey in between. So I think that's a soapbox I'm probably not the best person to equip on. What I would say, though, is I come back to this area of investment. Doing training well costs money, and people need to be able to plan for their future, you know, to where they should be investing, and letting employers are used to buying stuff. They buy stuff all the time, from the pencils to the computers to the, you know, the offices they use and everything else. So why do we suddenly think they're not equipped to know the difference between a rubbish training provider and a good training provider? You know, and I know I'm focusing very much on training rather than employability provision, but there does seem to be this, you know, I would imagine that Coca-Cola are a little bit slicker at working out what good looks like when they buy stuff than necessarily a civil servant somewhere. Yeah, but that's just my view.
That feels like a handy time to come over to Sharon, doesn't it? So I guess that there's a kind of there's a sort of, and feel free to range from the question I'm about to actually ask you, because actually it's more interesting discussion, because we're kind of picking up lots of points here. But I guess Richard's kind of making the point there that, you know, Coca-Cola, you spend your time buying stuff for all kinds of things all the time. So what's the balance? You know, do you feel like we should put you in charge, not you, well, perhaps you specifically, but you as an employer in charge a bit more fully? Or what's that balance between actually you making the best decisions for Coca-Cola versus what's right for the economy or for society? What's your kind of view on that balance?
So to Richard's point, yes, we are very slick at our buying. You're absolutely right. That's why we've been around for so long. But it's interesting, if I think about the white paper, it talked about putting employers at the heart. And I remember at the time asking the question, well, what does that actually mean, putting us at the heart? Because when the apprenticeship levy was introduced, it was about putting employers in charge. And I have to say, even now, I still don't feel we're in charge of it, because if you put one person or one factor in charge of something, you get one viewpoint. So therefore, for me, it is about the collaboration. So no, I wouldn't want me or Coca-Cola to be in charge. I'd want us to be a powerful voice with many other powerful voices that's driving forward the right agenda, to give us everything that we need, whether that be for the early careers. We have what's called a career builder program, which is for existing employees who wish to, you know, go back to learning and have that lifelong learning piece. And, you know, it was interesting, I think it was Richard said about somebody that's 60. Well, one of my oldest early career apprentices is 60, and she's taken a career change because of doing that program. And what's that's meant for us is that we still continue to invest in our employees and get the skills that we want for tomorrow. But I think we've got a bigger issue looming on the horizon with all of this, because when I look at what the government are planning, and as I said earlier, a lot of the initiatives are fantastic initiatives, but I don't see anybody really planning that 5-10 years out. And if I put my hat on from an apprenticeship perspective, you know, I've had a conversation with the OU, because we've talked very much about, you know, what does, from a manufacturing perspective, you know, augmented reality mean? What does artificial intelligence mean from a manufacturing perspective? And part of the reason why we started to look at that is, well, Brexit. Nobody talks about Brexit anymore, but Brexit had a phenomenal impact. And I'm keeping it its simplest point, that our manufacturers were able to just hop on a plane and come in to repair our equipment. It's no longer as straightforward and as simple as that, which means that the landscape we now operate in, we have to upskill our existing employee base, but that future workplace to how do you do robotics remotely? And I don't see anywhere in any apprenticeship standard, which I know they say is for employers, and the Trailblazer are about employers. But if you look at, you know, made in GB, made in the UK, we need that skill. And as a result of that, somebody needs to be saying, are we building that part of the new world into all of our planning? And I honestly don't think we are, or at least I haven't seen that happening at all out there. So do I want to be at the heart of it? Absolutely. Do I want to have full ownership of it? Absolutely not, because I don't think anyone can have full ownership in this space.
Thanks, Sharon. We got 2.5 hours in, I think, before the first mention of the B word. But it is, you know, along with this, the pandemic's obviously had an enormous short-term and probably long-term effect. And then, you know, Brexit is, whatever your views, is a significant change in our trading and operating relationships. And then we had the financial crisis 10 years ago, which we haven't mentioned. So there's been a lot going on. There's no doubt about that, which kind of plays to the uncertainty point as well, I think, that Kate was talking about earlier. Jane, perhaps if I kind of sort of link onto that, once the government had got Brexit done, to coin a phrase, whatever you, well, then levelling up is the sort of mantra now, and Mims talked about this at the start, sort of turning levelling up into that sort of policy platform and making it happen. But we know that unemployment has risen fastest in areas where it was already highest. And we know there's been big drop-offs in level 2 apprenticeships and also basic skills learning and lots of things like that. It feels like we're sort of levelling apart or splitting apart rather than levelling up. So from your perspective, what do we need to do to properly level up skills and employment opportunities?
So I think the starting point there is that what we really need to push for is progression. And just going back to Sharon's point, I think that whole long-term view is something which is possibly missing, and the white paper has not really addressed that kind of longer term. It feels quite short term, and it's like we're putting some sticking plasters over the already existing wounds. So I think what we need to do is we really push for progression. We've got all of these programs which are extremely confusing for employers and learners to understand. So we need to look at things like Kickstart, that progresses to an apprenticeship, and ALP has been calling for this now for some time. And what we're starting to see now is a Kickstarter jumping from Kickstart to Restart. And there is no training in all of that. So there is a real concern there about, you know, where's the training element? So, you know, I know the department and DWP are looking at how to make this work and trying to work together, and we really need them to work together, but that we need to really put some pressure on that progression and building training in. And there's always a concern about programs which don't have training in them. We have seen some examples of good practice around Kickstart where employers have built in some training, but I don't think that's actually the majority. So the push for progression and making sure that, you know, as Richard said earlier, provide the opportunities for somebody to go from level 2 to level 3. You know, let's make sure that happens, and that there is an ambition to do that. Individual learning accounts, I think, would be helpful in terms of people being able to continue to learn. We heard Kate talking about the value of learning through your life, and that's not just about work, it's about health and well-being. So, you know, the government is moving towards that loan system for levels 4 and 5 in technical education as part of the lifelong learning entitlement. AELP believes that adults' individual learning accounts should be brought back for level 3 and below to allow for individuals to be able to access that and to get to access training. And I think on the apprenticeships piece, there needs to be a rebalancing of the system. There needs to be an assured entry point for young people and adults, whether that's with a levy-paying employer or a non-levy-paying employer. And again, what AELP has been asking for some time is recognition that non-levy-paying SMEs, there should be a standalone budget there, and actually that there should be that 16 to 18 apprenticeships should be funded out of mainstream DFE budgets. Just so I think broadly, and then I suppose, overlaying all of that in terms of levelling up. Let's not focus on one part of the sector. Let's recognise the quality of delivery we've got across the sector, and recognise what different providers can bring to the table, and just level that out. We have that situation where you've got the 10% access for independent training providers currently to adult education budget. Let's look at that, level that up, because what we need is that tapestry of provision in the sector so that we can respond. And as Richard said, we don't know what may happen in five years' time. We need to adapt, we need to be flexible, and we need to adjust. And in order to do that, we need to have that breadth of provision available to us and not make it as rigid as it seems. The direction of travel seems to be very rigid. Let's not do that. Let's try to recognise that we need a breadth of provision so that people can access the skills that they want to pick up and to reskill.
Great, thanks, Jane. I'm sort of with you on a number of those points, and the sort of the join-up point links back a bit to something Sharon was talking about earlier, actually, between departments, the sort of holy grail. I think if I was working in DWP, I'd be more concerned about hitting what I would see as my Kickstart starts target than what I would see as DFE's traineeship start target, which kind of plays to the point about the purpose is actually get a young person a job that they can keep and progress in, and these are inputs to get to that. Interestingly, there was a point in perhaps the least remarked bit of the skills white paper is sections that talk about focusing more on outcomes from learning and skills provision, and I think we're expecting more on that from the government soonish, and there will be a forthcoming Learning and Work Institute report looking at some international examples of doing that. So, Janie, just very quickly before I go across to Richard, I'm not sure if that outcomes bit has kind of hit your radar, but is that sort of greater focus on outcomes something that you would say could help with some of the issues you've talked about?
I think that the outcomes piece seems to be linked to the greater powers of the Secretary of State to intervene, actually. And I'm not sure that that's, everybody wants to deliver outcomes, but actually the purpose of the outcomes inclusion in the white paper is kind of, it's clouded by that whole intervention piece. And that's a concern. We are all for quality. We are all, providers are Ofsted, they're Ofsted inspected. So, there is that quality piece there. That intervention piece seems to be a bit, a little heavy-handed, let's say.
I think that's a very fair point. Yeah, you're right. It's kind of linked to accountability and intervention, as opposed to sort of to allow more join up and sort of freedom to deliver those outcomes, I think. So no, I think that's a very fair point, well made. Richard, if I sort of pick up on that join up point with you as well, because you've got experience on the sort of more employment side and on the training side and lots of bits in between and joining those up. So I'm just, it feels like ever since I started working on this, and probably people have got much more longer history going back, we've always been talking about old DFE and DWP to join up a bit more. Is this something where we should just kind of give in on that? It's not going to happen at national policy level, and really it's about local delivery and trying to get some freedoms for people to join up in practice, or should we keep banging on about it?
Well, at Aptum, we've got an employability podcast, and one of the people we interviewed was Stephen Timms. And it was really interesting hearing him say he got on really well with his counterpart, the fellow, and he couldn't join it up. He said it wasn't that we were fighting or trying to be one over the other. It's just really difficult to get those two departments to work together. So everything that's just been said is absolutely spot on. I mean, we straddle it too. We've got loads of people delivering Kickstart and our technology, loads of people doing traineeships, loads of people, and it's just different, and it's not joined up, and that's the downside of government. And there's some areas where localization works really well. But then you've also got the trouble with devolution and localization is you sometimes got, well, we're not going to do a program like those people just down the road, because then what's the point of having autonomy? So they have a slightly different program, and then the provider has to suddenly have the difficulties of trying to manage concurrently multiple streams, all similar-ish, but not quite the same. I'm once again saying I don't know the answer, But what I would say is there are a few things that technology should be highly regarded for. The ability to personalize. We experience it in our daily lives. We experience it when our phone kind of knows that now's the time we tend to go on our commute and suggests where the next place should go into your maps. You know, we experience it with a shopping app. We experience it with so many areas. Why don't we use it for learning? Now, I get if personalization is useless for the individual who's got no interest in participation. That's a different problem. But if we do have individuals who are open to learning and vocational training journeys, let's allow technology to personalize. Let's create a competitive market. Let someone come out and put us out of business because they're just better than us. Because that will fire us up to try and be better than them. And that's what creates these innovations that can make a really strong difference. And it's not happening like it should. And that's why I'd hope with an employer-driven market, there'd be a little bit more encouragement of that, because they'd prefer the better and they'd avoid the less good. So joining up between the different departments, you got it, absolutely. That's a political thing. Enabling investment in good technology to make a difference, absolutely. Having planning for the things of the future, sure. But I suppose if there's one thing, no, two things, it's having young people understand that a life of lifelong vocational learning is what's going to be necessary. So if they do leave without knowing how to use SharePoint, they don't resent the idea of having to learn SharePoint. They just see it as naturally what they need to do. That would be one thing, and that's a hard thing to do, but we need to do it because, you know, even in my world, the technologies that are changing, you know, anyone who was in software development a few years ago would talk about virtual machines and things like that. Now it's all DevOps and, you know, cloud-based and and this is in a handful of years. So this necessity to keep on changing and learning is vital, and so encouraging that. And then there's absolutely got to be the picking people up who are outside the system. Because if you're outside the system, it doesn't matter how good provision is, they're outside the system. And Coca-Cola, with respect, are a great employer, but they're not going to be interested in people who are disruptive, disinterested, not willing to turn up, whatever. I assume. Maybe I'm being totally unfair, Sharon, I apologize. My company would be, my company would be worried about individuals who are fundamentally disruptive and would be less able to give them assistance at an early stage, but very keen to have people who have talent and potential who are open to learning. So how we pick up the individuals who, for whatever reason, are excluded, for whatever reason, have been left behind, that absolutely needs down where the state needs to have an impact.
Can I come back on that point, Stephen?
Well, yes, I was. Richard set you up nicely, and I was going to come to you for actually the last word, so you can kind of respond to that. But also, I was interested. I think you talked at the start. We talk a lot about providers hiding the wiring because there's loads of complicated stuff and all the rest. We need to hide the wiring for employers and for people. It sounded from what you were saying at the start as though you're kind of hiding the wiring yourself in terms of the rest of the business, and then also with the people you're engaging with. So if you sort of talk a little bit about that, and also in response to Richard's point.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So Richard, I probably, if you had made that comment maybe 5 years ago, I probably would have been in agreement with you. But organisations like ours have definitely moved further forward in terms of our thinking and engagement with a lot of those young adults who probably come from underrepresented groups, more socially deprived backgrounds. You know, social mobility is the word of the moment, along with levelling up. But those young individuals who might be seen as disruptors actually have a lot of potential. They just need more nurturing, and often people then discard them, and you know, it's self-fulfilling prophecy, isn't it? Well, you think I'm disruptive, you're not giving me the opportunity, so I'm going to continue to be disruptive. So for us, you know, we've got a real drive on, let's identify their potential. What is it that makes them tick that we can actually enable and support with them? But in order for us to do that, we've tapped into a lot of the initiatives. And those initiatives, we've had to kind of create our own golden threads through them, as I was saying earlier, purely and simply because it goes back to departments don't like talking to departments. So the traineeship programme, I think it's a fantastic opportunity. So we utilised it this summer in order to build into our Kickstart. The only problem was the traineeship side of it, which is DFE, and the Kickstart, which was DWP, was a very clear message of, you can't do that. They're two different programs. You can't create your golden thread. But we did create our golden thread because that was absolutely the right thing for us to be able to do. But in order for me to be able to bring this into our organisation, I've had to sell it as a journey, and that all of these things can go together without all the politics that sit behind it with government. And so, you know, our training providers that we work with are fantastic. And in actual fact, you know, when we look at the devolved nations, so Scotland, we had to do a slightly different programme with it, but it gave us the same end results. Problem is, there's a minefield that you have to navigate through, and you have to have perseverance to navigate through it. And so probably to the people who are listening today on the whole recovery and renewal, I'm not going to say it's easy, because trust me, it's not. It's probably been even harder, the fact that we're having to do everything remotely as well. But if you persevere, think about who's that end person. What are we trying to achieve here? We're trying to achieve roles for young people and creating those opportunities, our skills for the future, to make sure that as an organisation and as a country, we are still seen to be the best that we possibly can. And that's all I've got to say, Steve.
Thank you, Sharon. I think that's a very good note to finish on. I feel like we could have kept going for hours more, so maybe we'll all stay on and do a sort of director's cut version for YouTube afterwards or something. But thank you to Sharon and to Richard and to Jane for what I think was a really engaging discussion, and spots off loads of conversation on the chat there in the Q&A, which I think is a really good sign. So thank you so much for that. It's greatly appreciated. What I'm going to do just before I talk about what's going to happen next is I'm going to ask the team if they could please bring up the results of the poll that you've all been voting on. So reminder of the question: what should be the top skills priority? Oh, well, to be honest, I was not expecting that result. So aligning provision with employer-led LSIPs, top of the pops, followed by basic skills training, followed by apprenticeships, particularly for young people, followed by the lifetime skills guarantee. So thank you everybody for voting. It's always, I don't know if it's good or bad, so it's a different result to what I thought, but it's kind of good to see lots of people getting engaged in that, and I'm sure Gavin Williamson will be very happy with that result. I don't know if the DFE officials are sort of clicking away. Brilliant. Okay, well that's kind of that's really interesting and helpful. Next, just a few words by way of summary for me before I talk about what we're all doing next. A huge thank you, as I said at the start, to our lead sponsor Aptem, and also to our group sponsor Clarion Futures, because your support really does enable us to do things like this event, which hopefully has been really engaging for the 800 or so people who we've had dialed in. So thank you hugely for that support. Please do, I kind of mentioned at the start, it's not a virtual program, the interactive program, that's the word I'm looking for, that you should all have hopefully been emailed, which has lots of links in there for our sponsors and exhibitors as well. So please do click through to those, and some pre-recorded content in there for you to check out as well. So before I just talk about what's going to happen next, I hope you'll just indulge me for a moment, and I hope that she won't mind me for embarrassing her. This would be a lot easier to do if we're actually in one room rather than me just staring at a screen. But this is actually Mintra, who's our head of events. This is her last convention, and she will be leaving the Learning and Work Institute. And I wanted, you can't see them because we're all sort of online, but she's got hopefully a very nice bunch of flowers somewhere at home there. And I wanted to say a personal thanks to Mintra for making, both before I joined the Learning and Work Institute and afterwards, this convention and so many other events being so brilliantly and professionally run and so engaging, and hopefully so good for everyone who's dialing in and was delegates as well. So I wanted to say a personal thanks to Mintra for all of her work across the years, which has been truly invaluable, as well as a thanks to the whole Learning and Work Institute team for helping to make today happen as well. So this is the point at which we would normally, you'd normally be seeing a bunch of flowers and you'd all be applauding. So this is slightly weird, but I'm going to take a set of virtual applause as being, I'm sure is going on via the app. So thank you to Mintra particularly. And then just in terms of what's happening now, we're extremely grateful to everybody for dialing in and for being part of this event and for contributing so many questions and comments and debates going on via the chat as well. It kind of makes it much more an interactive event. Hopefully next year we might be able to do at least some of this back in person as well, because I know that sort of networking is really valuable as well. But we are now having, so we will shortly be going to the breakout sessions. There are links to these within the interactive program, but the links should also be popping up within Slido as well. In fact, I can see them there, so you can just click through from there or from the interactive program. I would suggest that you click through now, so you'll be in a waiting room ready to go into those breakout rooms. But you do have approximately, well, you have until past, I think, so that's about 12 minutes by my clock. It says recess. I think that's a euphemism for cup of tea break. So click into the room via the links, wait in the waiting room, go and get yourself a cup of tea, and then those breakouts, which are brilliant, will start at 12:30. So we won't be coming back to this main room afterwards. So I would just like to finish by saying a huge thank you again to our sponsors, to Aptem and to Clarion Futures, to all of the speakers for being so engaging and for giving of their time as well, and to everybody who's taken part in the event, who's registered, who's voted on the poll, who's asked a question and had a debate on the chat as well. So thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you hopefully in person next year. So thank you and goodbye.